goes the record. There goes the encoder. And we are up and running.
Welcome. Thank you once again for hanging out with us. This is the one and only IT in the D show. We made it all the way up to episode 374. Catch us online, itinthed.com. Do us a favor, give us a like on all of the socials and subscribe to us everywhere fine podcasts are sold.
That's right. You can catch us online. You can catch us on podcasts. You will not catch us outside, at least not for the next few weeks.
How about that?
Yeah, no. How about that? No. Just we're gonna be good little kids, and we're grounded again. And we're gonna go ahead.
Well, contrary to popular belief, that the Rona was going to be over the day after the election, apparently that's not true.
Well, I think it's because the votes are still being counted, Bob. It's not official yet. So until the actual certification takes place, I think we still have to deal with COVID.
Fine. In that case, we'll bring Fred on. Oh, hey, Fred.
Hey, guys. How's everything? Good to see you.
Good seeing you. So, Fred, what's going on? Like, we thought this thing was going to be, at least was like kind of taking a dip, slowing down. Everything's under control. And lo and behold, we're in double down mode.
If you would recall, the last time Fred was on our show, he basically told us this was exactly what was going to happen. It has now happened, and here we are. So I would encourage people to sit down with A, strong drink, B, a notebook and a pen, and take notes during that.
I'll actually show you what I said last time, Bob. So you but it made me recall it to your recollection. But yeah, it's I wasn't very optimistic on our last call. How long ago was that? That was about 8 weeks.
About 3-4 weeks now. Yeah,
only 3 or 4 weeks. Well, yeah. Well, a lot has happened and good things.
Because it was right after the Michigan Supreme Court shot down Whitmer's executive order. So I think that's 4 weeks.
That's right. We went into the economic impact of that shutdown. Of her shooting there. I remember that now. And since then, we've had some good news. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the good news. And we've run some analyses. I wanted to show you some of that. During the course of the discussion, it's interesting you bring up the fact that we haven't yet had a concession from the current administration. And so I'll refer to a new administration, and you should review that as leave that as normal, as neutral. Whatever happens, it doesn't really matter. The virus will still act the way it's going to act. And
I think that's the one thing that, and I really appreciate the fact, and I'm sure you watched Whitmer's address last night too. She is very calm, very, very level-headed, and very logical when she's laying things out. And I think that's, COVID doesn't care who you voted for. COVID doesn't care whether or not you want your kids back in school. COVID doesn't care.
It'll come and find you. It'll come and find you and give you a hard time. Well, so
the lady that does the oh, go ahead, Fred.
No, please.
The lady that does the
sign language translation
caption or for the hearing impaired. She needs her own TV show. I mean, the looks on her face, I've never seen it like it in my life. Sometimes I can't even pay attention to Whitmer because I'm like watching her. She's so animated.
Oh, anyway, she's so animated.
Well, I wrote this presentation actually before Governor Whitmer did her thing. As you know, Michigan is one of the few states I do not consult to. So, but I do consider her one of the better groups, one of the better states. If I had to kind of rank her, I think she's one of the top, probably 5 or 10 governors responses to the virus overall. So she's done an excellent job in most areas. There's a couple of areas that I would have a slight issue with, but overall she's done an excellent job. Should be commended. And what I want to say is that I gave this presentation to the fellows at Harvard because they were interested in the vaccine impact. And so literally a couple of days after Pfizer announced its vaccine and the results of the vaccine, well, the Data Safety Board of the FDA looked at the results and announced the 90%. They asked me to do some analyses, and I wanted to show you some of those analyses. Now, when I gave it to the fellows of Harvard, we went through this for about 4 hours. So, so hopefully we won't take that much time. They probably weren't as smart as our audience, so they didn't get it as fast. But I wanted to let you know that some of these issues are kind of interesting, and if you have questions, feel free to just jump right in.
Pfizer, if I recall correctly, so this recap
anyway. So
yeah, exactly. All we were going to do was talk about the Mandalorian. Mandalorian episode.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, so so if I recall correctly, so Pfizer, this trial run that they did was 94 people, if I
That's
recall
right.
correctly. Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, and what they found was, so what they do is they vaccinate 15,000 people. In this case, they actually vaccinated about 37,000 people, 38,000 people. They're going to 44. They have to, close. They've already shut down the whole trial, but you have to go through 2 doses, and they have to go through 2 months of analysis of the safety data before you're allowed to respond. But they had interim trials all the way planned out, and we'll go into some of that, the way they designed this trial, because the trial design is really critical in understanding what the impact is of the vaccine. We'll go into that in some detail, but basically what they found was that 94 people said, "Hey, I don't feel very good. I'm going to go to the hospital." Tested them, and it turned out that they had the injection of either saline, or they had the injection of the vaccine, and 94 of them got sick. Of those 94, they had over 90% infection, which means, if you do all the math, about over 86 people in the 94 had to have just gotten the saline solution, and then about maybe 8 or maybe even 0 got of these groups got the vaccine, and that meant that the vaccine was that effective in stopping very the symptoms. And we'll go into some of the significance of that. But why don't I show you some of the slides, that if you'd like, and then we'll then feel free to break in anytime, and I will show you what I showed them, and you guys can see what you think. But it may take a little while to go through some of it, because it's sort of interesting, and we can stop anytime. You guys get tired, you tell me, and we'll stop.
I'm hardly, I never get bored with it. I get freaked out. I don't get bored.
Oh, so this is the update. So as you remember, last time we talked about some of the large things, and I purposely left out vaccines. And everyone's saying, "Wait a minute, what about the vaccines?" And I said, it's September 2nd. We're going to have readouts in the middle of October, and we're going to know a lot more about the vaccine at that point. I don't really want to say what I think I know from the data, but because it would be too speculative. Now we know a little bit more, and so I thought, why not? We'll talk a little bit more about what happened. So I gave this. Sorry about the session number. It's that HBS is the business school is really most interested. After I talked to the fellows, they wanted to hear more about the business impact of this. So
I assure you, we're not judging you by slide titles.
Okay. So HBS stands for our business school. At any rate, they wanted to hear more about it, and basically. Since we talked last, I've still been advising a lot of businesses on strategy, how to open safely. I've still been advising manufacturers on process acceleration, regulatory dynamics. As you know, I was working with USAID and a few other groups in other countries. I've been consulting with about 7 different countries, national governments. I've done working with about 18 states, actually 19 now, states, talking to them and how they're going to reopen. I've worked at the U.S. federal level for quite a bit of time. I'm working at with a lot of the EU member states, as well as some of the non-EU member states in Europe. And basically, I told you last time I helped on campaign areas. If you look at this map, I gave this to both of the campaigns. The response on the Biden administration campaign was to actually to do a lot more remotely and focus on these states. The response of the Trump campaign was to actually have a lot of rallies in these areas. That wasn't my initial intention, but each of the campaigns did what they wanted with the data. And then I also have been helping Operation Warp Speed. I don't know if you know about OWS. Have you heard about OWS? I think we talked a little bit about it last time, but we've been working on that group, and some really important data has come out of some of that work, and I want to show some of it. Some of it is confidential and proprietary / national security, so I can't tell you everything we know, but I'll try to.
You could tell us, but then you'd have to kill us.
That's right. Well, I've been authorized to talk about the stuff that's being presented, at least. And then I actually presented both campaigns. This was for Senator Harris. The transitions, I think, are going to be necessary regardless of who the administration is, in order to control the virus. So my notes on this is a really, really simplified version, right? This gets really complicated. We'll go into some complex immunologic concepts. We'll go into some complex logistics and so if you're already expert in the area, I apologize in advance. It is a little bit overly simplified, but if it's kind of made so that people understand what I'm talking about.
I'm sure a lot of people on Facebook believe they are.
Oh, they are. There are a lot of
Experts.
smart
Oh
people
yeah,
out
no,
there.
I'm sure, because I mean everybody
There are a
on
lot of smart people out there.
it's
So
amazing how many people on my friends list were, constitutional experts back during the impeachment trial. Then they became immunology experts as soon as COVID broke. They've become electoral college experts.
Oh, now they do. Yeah, so I actually try to work in the space that I claim expertise in. So I've actually been involved with a number of major pandemics and developed success. 17 diagnostics and 27 drugs. So I know a little about the space, but I'm sure people can contribute to it and have opinions about it. So I'd love to hear them. It is still extremely early days. So everything I'm talking about now has basically been the result of press releases and not scientific journal articles. So that's that. And everything's been made public that I'm going to talk about, but maybe it'll be a different kind of point of view. All these opinions are mine alone. I mean, I'm not working with anybody when I release this data, except I do talk to my clients to make sure that's okay. And please use all this material. I'll send it over to you, Dave. It'll be on my website, fredbrown.com.
Awesome.
And just pick it up. So the agenda, right? We're going to talk about my predictions, how they looked, and that it'll reflect back on what Bob had to say last time. We'll talk a little about the science. We'll talk about production operations management. If you enjoy that work, we'll get into some of this in some detail. We'll talk about financial implications for big pharma, and then we'll talk about how we're going to get moved to normalcy, which I think we might actually be able to look at with some hope. So with that, here's the first piece. Bob said, gosh, Fred, I thought last time you talked to us, things looked pretty good. And that wasn't exactly our recollection, but depends on how much you were focused on and how much you wanted to look through rose-colored glasses. But I basically, as you know, I started my projections on March 23rd, right? I tuned in the model starting February 7th. I then projected March 23rd. And on March 23rd, I thought we'd have between 145 and 180,000 deaths. By September 1st, we actually had 184,629. I was a little bit low, but if you think about that fact, we only had 700 deaths in March to project 180,000, was pretty aggressive at the time. When I talked to other officials, at WHO, at the World Bank, at a number of large banking organizations, for example, they all thought I was insane. But frankly, a lot of us had these kind of predictions when we saw what was going on. Especially after the Davos event. If you went and attended Davos or watched some of that event, you realized that this was going to be pretty serious, and that we'll get back into that in a second. Then I know on last time I talked, Bob, I actually thought we'd have about between 238,000, 250,000 deaths. We had 245 on November 14th, and that's so I was right. I've been within 2% all the way along here, but sadly, I think we're going to have slightly over 300,000 deaths by the end of the year, and we'll probably max out at about 3,000 a day. It could spike higher than that, significantly higher. But if you look at weekly averages, it'll be at that range through till about the middle or so of January, till about January 20th. We'll have that kind of a spike in deaths. So
I think I saw El Paso has set up 10 basically boxcar portable morgues.
Yeah, it's getting bad. In fact, in Missouri, they're transporting people to Iowa, and South Dakota, they're transporting people to Montana because they just don't have any capacity left. And that's going to happen more and more. And what we're starting to see is the rural hospitals, the rural nursing homes. If you look at the penetration of what's going on in those spaces, we moved from a rural penetration of about 3% death rate of those nursing homes and elderly to now over half of the deaths are occurring in those rural areas. So it really is everywhere. And the problem with the rural areas is they don't have the capacity to.
They don't have the infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about 25-bed hospitals with no isolation capabilities, single hallway environments that they can't separate the COVID cases from the rest of the hospital. Those are the kind of hospitals that are going to have a lot of challenges. So that's what the death rate looks like. Death rates are harder to predict. Here you can see what the reality was versus I actually copied my curve over the chart, and you can see. It's reasonably close. Basically, I said 100,000 deaths. We had 98,000 deaths. I said, but that was October 30th. That was my projection. So already back in March, I said in September when we talked when I started this this new forecast 150, we're at 153. So it's sort of within 2%, and that's sort of what we're going to look like. Sadly, through into January, and we'll be at peaking that at that point. And we had some economic projections also, and what was interesting about that was, Larry Summers, who was one of the great economists. He's was president of Harvard for a number of years, and then is still there and has a whole bunch of graduate students he can kind of sick on this. In March, my projections were this was going to cost us $17.2 trillion in our economy over based on death rate projected through September 1st, and Larry said it was 16.2. So I was like, within 9% of his numbers, which isn't bad. He's a pretty smart guy. So I was pretty happy about that. We used all the same, interestingly, we used the same assumptions, which is sort of fun to watch. So at any rate, economically, if people said we couldn't predict it, yeah, we really could. And if they said we really couldn't predict the health, yeah, we really could. That wasn't the problem. The problem was we didn't respond to it like we probably should have. And here's the different responses that we talked about. Remember, we talked about getting lucky, brutal, or the marathon. And initially, and I made a mistake here. I thought on April 20th, you don't want to really bet that you're going to get lucky. It's sort of like saying, I'm going to go and bet the lottery and quit my job. You don't want to do that. But that's true. What we did. And you know what? It looks like it's going to pay off, you guys. I mean, it's remarkable, but we quit our job. We're waiting for the lottery ticket to hit, and we're getting closer and closer. In fact, with Moderna's announcement today, I think there's I would raise this now. This was based on Pfizer's results. I'd raise this to 90% at this point, believe it or not. I think there's a 90% chance we're going to have, between 1 and 8 vaccines by the middle of next year. Let me make that fall of next year. And we should have 2 vaccines by the end of this year, and we should have 4 to 5 vaccines by April of next year. And I did not think that was going to happen. As you saw, I thought most of what we were going to be doing was doing a little bit of hoping to get lucky, but most of it was going to be, let's plan for that marathon event that we're really going to try to control this. We're going to measure it. We're going to put in new systems. And if we do that, we'll only have 650,000 deaths. We'll let this whole thing run wild. We'll probably have 2.2 million deaths. But now right now we're on the path of only 500,000 deaths through the end of next year. And that's better than I thought we were going to be.
So curiosity and just for folks. So when you say, up to as many as 8 different vaccines, so what does that mean to me sitting at home? Is one going to be better than the other? Are they just different brand names of the same thing? Is it like, the Frosted Flakes versus whatever, Aldi brand is out there?
We'll go into that in a lot of detail, actually, I promise, because that's really why I want to get, get everyone in front of this, because we're going to have to study this stuff and watch it as it comes in, right? And so what I've done is I've created scenarios. And so you'll see that this looks like a very good scenario overall. And that's because we are in the get lucky overall scenario. It is not, we're not talking about black swan events. We're talking about, if we're in the scenario, this is what we're going to look like. And some people will say, gosh, can you kind of mix the scenarios? And the answer is yes, we can. But I wanted to kind of run the data quickly and say, okay, let's say that everything is coming up roses. What does get lucky look like really? And you'll see that these are results of getting lucky really. And so with that caveat, let's take a look at this. The reason that I didn't bet on getting lucky is because it requires something. It requires that we have an actual revolution in the science. And I didn't want to bet on that. I
remember that conversation. Yeah.
We had some suggestive evidence that we really were undergoing a revolution. And this is literally the kind of revolution that we're seeing. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We're talking about atomic bomb level. We're talking about nuclear energy. We're talking about winning the space race and getting to the moon first. We're talking about that level of bet that we made and paid off on. And that's remarkable. These synthetic vaccine capabilities are going to just change the way that we fundamentally respond to outbreaks in the future. It bodes extremely well for COVID-22, COVID-24, COVID-26. If we have that kind of a sequence of events that says we're going to be able to respond again to a super virus like this, which back in April, I was worried that we wouldn't be able to. And with this kind of technology, and we'll talk a little bit about what that technology is in a second, this really is a fundamental change in the way we develop vaccines and the way we treat diseases, a whole number of diseases, not just infectious diseases. We're talking about cancers. We're talking about protein deficiencies that you're born with, like for example, cystic fibrosis. We're talking about new antibiotic capability. We're talking about carbohydrates, be able to change the way we do our carbohydrate lipid metabolism in our body, which is remarkable. And so we bet really three things on betting it all and getting lucky. First, that we can vastly expand the vaccine sweet spot. We'll talk about that. We bet that we can completely change the process we select our lead compounds in research, and we bet that the regulatory authorities would allow us to completely change the way that we develop our drugs. Other than that, we didn't bet for much. We weren't expecting too much on the deal. So that's why I didn't say 80% coming out, but now that we're starting to see some of this pay off, we're talking about one of these really rare events in our lifetime. And gosh, we're right in the middle of it. And if we can make the logistics work, which we'll talk about in Operation Warp Speed in a little while, we're going to save a lot of lives as a result of this bet. So, hats off to Moncef Slaoui, who saw this and I didn't. Hats off to Trump, who was well advised, obviously, in certain areas, because he bet on this, and I didn't think we were going to pull it off, and we did. And interestingly, the Chinese didn't bet on this either initially. So that was the one area that we were really ahead of them on, and they have caught up because they've gone ahead and invested in this technology. They have access to the Pfizer technology now, but initially they didn't, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. So at any rate, let's talk a little bit about expanding the vaccine sweet spot. Basically, we have a lot of trouble getting vaccines with our traditional technologies, getting vaccines for certain kinds of viruses. And those are the viruses that you see on the far left-hand side. Basically, if they are very short incubation periods, we have trouble catching up with them, right? Because they incubate and establish themselves so fast in our body that our body doesn't have a chance to respond fast enough. Now, the vaccine is supposed to up our ability to respond rapidly. And that happens, with rubella, with mumps, measles. We actually push our immune systems a little bit, and they respond fast enough to catch up with the virus and kill it off before it actually establishes itself. With all the MERS, all the coronaviruses to date, with the flu, with rhinoviruses, we're not able to catch it fast enough, and so it establishes itself and takes off. This technology, the synthetic, what it does, we take a little piece of the virus, not the whole virus, and in this case, it's all the spike protein. We put it into a transport platform, either an adenovirus or lots of lipids. We surround it, and then we inject it into the body. And it doesn't have enough of the virus left to be virulent, but it has enough of the virus for our immune system to say, hey, wait a minute, that's something that's foreign. I'm going to go and kill it. And in this case, the spike virus is highly conserved, so the virus really needs it to work. And so by having something that recognizes just that spike virus, we're able to kill off the virus before it establishes it. And interestingly, what we do in this case is we actually engage the machinery that bacteria and viruses themselves engage in our own cells. So we're able to go as fast as they are for the very first time, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so basically, we've broadened that sweet spot out. Now we'll wait and see. The other thing that viruses do is they hide. They move fast enough mutation-wise. They change their sheath codes fast enough that we can't find them. Our immune system can't find them. And slowly but surely, even though it takes a long time to establish themselves, they'll get established. And that's HIV, that's AIDS, malaria, that's HCV, cytomegalovirus. Those viruses we still can't control very well, but we're getting there, and between good chemistry and good genetic technology, we may be able to color this entire graph green in a few years, which would be remarkable. So that's what we bet. That's the sweet spot, right? We're expanding that sweet spot out. We've done that. Step 2. So the next bet we made was not only can we do this, we can do this repetitively, consistently, and we can do this so fast that we're going to change the way we do R&D. And back in the day when I was doing a vaccine work, we isolated the virus, we cultured the virus, we identified leads from that virus, we optimized those leads, we attenuated the leads, right? And slowly but surely, we actually got something that took 4, 5, 10 years before we even got into preclinical development, testing animals, then testing people. Believe it or not, Moderna, once the genetic code of this virus, COVID, was published, they had their lead in 1 day. They went from 5 years
Yikes.
to 1 day, because all they had to do was say, what are the ones that we want to, and you know, at University of California, San Francisco, they published very rapidly. About 26 days later, they said, here are all the proteins you want to use for vaccines. Here are all the proteins we can go after with regard to medicines that are on the shelf. Well, Moderna knew what they had, right? They said, we got this lipid technology. We're going to put this gene into the lipid technology. That took them 1 day to do. They announced it, and they were in people in 44 days. They were in people, and we're not even talking about, you know, mice. We're not talking. They went right to people in 44 days. And in the case of Moderna, 200 days later, they had signed. Not only they had signed $1.9 billion deal in January. They signed a $2 billion, and then they added another $1 billion to that deal 213 days later. Sometimes I recall in like June. That's how fast it went, right? And you're talking about deals that normally, back in the day when Big Pharma, you know, when we were doing deals, it's, hey, we finally got something. We're in phase 2B. It's been 8-9 years. Things are looking pretty good. What do you guys think? They say, well, we have to think about it a little bit longer. Now we're talking about 244 days and do a deal. So that's remarkable, right?
How's that going to change the industry, Fred?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, is it going to open up new players? Is it, you know?
Well, Moderna's a brand new player, right? Basically, Moderna was started by a company called, by a venture capitalist called Flagship about eight years ago, I think. And they said, you know, we really want to change the way we do, way we develop drugs. We're going to, you know, insert these genes into the drugs, into these platforms, and it'll, you know, change the way we work with cancer, because we'll be able to shift the tumor genes over and be able to, you know, fight them and, you know, observe them and fight them. And so that was Moderna's kind of raison d'etre, and they went from there. What's interesting is, if you think about it, Johnson & Johnson's working with a little company called BioNTech, right? They're a little company, 130 people. It wasn't Pfizer's. Pfizer had the capacity. They had some capability to manufacture, but they had to go around and look and find, you know, which companies out there, which small companies out there that has what we think is the best, the best antigen to put into our platform, and they found BioNTech. So it isn't, you know, some of the small companies really paid off. Novavax, smaller company again, they've never developed a manufactured vaccine. They actually went out to Takeda and they said, "Yes, you know, you want to help us out?" And they said, "Yeah, sign us up. You know, if you got the right thing." Well, you know, they were smart. They, you know, Rajiv, who runs that operation, who I, you know, worked with for a long time, great guy. He said, "Yeah, you know, I'm in. Count me in." You know, and 65 days later, after they tested 65 people, the U.S. government put in $1.6 billion. I mean, usually we have to test tens of thousands of people to get that kind of deal done, right? In this case, you know, here's the number of people. 52 people looked at, actually were injected with BioNTech's drug, and we signed up for $2 billion.
So I mean, I guess, is there a downside to that?
Well, you know, when we first developed jet airplanes, and we said, gosh, you know, now it takes us, New York, London, used to take us, you know, 10 hours, and you had to stop and you had to, you know, catch your breath in Ireland and then do the rest of the hop in Greenland. Now when the jet airplane came out, they said we can do it in, you know, 5 hours. People said, it's a little bit fast. I'm not really sure I want to do that. And, you know, it took a little bit of time for people to get used to that new speed. And now where we're used to it, we love it, right? But back in the day, there is some speed. The answer to your question, actually, seriously, is that we did cut some corners, and we'll talk about how we cut those corners, you know, during the course. What we did is we basically relied on what was in our biggest companies' coffers already. We didn't look for the absolute best solution. We looked at a solution that we could get out rapidly. And so there probably are some vaccines that have been left on the table that would be slightly better than what we got, because, you know, we only took, you know, literally 60 days to make a selection of everything that was out there. So there is a slight risk that we will suboptimize, and that we won't have found the very best option for us on round one. But I'll tell you, 90%, 94% efficacy.
That's not terrible. Yeah.
I've been working in this space for 40 years, and I worked on one vaccine had 90% efficacy. Everything else had 50, 60, 70, 80% initially. So it's just off the charts. Really, it's really remarkable. The next big area, though, that we bet on. So then we said, okay, fine. Now we go from preclinical into clinical. And what we bet on clinical was, let's go ahead and use that money the U.S. government gave us and manufacture all the stuff before we even know if it works in human beings or not. That's a big bet, right? We're talking about 30, 40, 50.
Yeah, it's a hell of a gamble.
Right. Now, if you don't have the scale up, that's how much you're paying. And then we're going to go through all these phases of clinical trial work, and we're going to do so much in parallel. You saw most of the stuff said, most of these trials were designed as phase 1, phase 1B, phase 2A, 2B, and then it said phase 1, 2, phase 2, 3. That's because they carried those subjects on into the next trial phase, so they had as much data about how safe it was for how long. You'll see that's an important factor collected with their limited number of subjects that they used in order to get to the next endpoint. So these trials were very carefully designed to be as efficient as possible. If you look at Pfizer's design, every 32 patients that come down with the disease, they can demonstrate statistically significant efficacy at the level they were expecting. So they designed it absolutely, right to the edge of statistical significance for every phase of the trial, and it caught them a little bit because the FDA changed the rules on just the last minute. They said, oh, by the way, we don't want 1 month of safety data. Well, let's just do 2. And they went, what? After that, so
right.
It did surprise them there. We'll talk about why they did that in a second. But basically, these trials were incredibly brilliantly designed, for statistics, for demonstrating the absolute minimum clinical endpoint. For example, on the efficacy side, and we'll talk about why that could hurt us in a second. But that did hurt us, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. And then, and with safety, we will lose some specificity and some sensitivity in the trial. But basically, they did just enough to get through the hurdles that the FDA established as fast as they possibly could to get to market first. And there's some reasons that you want to get to market first, and we'll talk about as well toward the end. But basically, the FDA changed a lot of the rules. They said, go ahead. You don't have to. First of all, they said, none of this cultured virus stuff. There's one lab in the whole United States can really deal with the cultured viruses at this level with this level of exposure. It's one that's owned by the Department of Defense, as I recall. That's it. So don't do any cultured virus work. Let's work just with the genetic vaccines. That limited our technology. So we went right down to the very tightest piece of technology. We really, in other words, we doubled down on this bet early on, again and again and again, and we were hitting it. So can't disagree with it. We allowed companies to overlap all the clinical phasing, right? They said, go ahead, test for healthy patients, which is phase 1. Then go ahead and go into people who are more affected. That's phase 2. Then they allowed to combine those things. They were able to get more clinical statistical significance. They used EUA, so this emergency use. We hadn't really used emergency use for an awful long time. Very, very rarely. This time we opened it up and did it quite broadly. We fast tracked the approvals. We also limited their liability right up front as on the government if people had trouble with the disease because we went too fast. That was the government's. That was on us, the U.S. government, versus not wouldn't it get back to, for example, J&J or the others who were involved in this. Operation Warp Speed offered money, and they offered pre-order. They said, well, we're going to buy 100 million of those doses right now. Sign us up. If it gets FDA approved, you've got 100 million order on day 1. So remarkable amounts of incentives, thinking through exactly what was going to happen, well designed, well executed on the administration's part. Really, really, really great job. And of course, the company seizing the opportunity. They said, we got some stuff. We can try it out. It may or may not work. It's not been tested on more than 300 people, or it's not been, it's not really used more than 400 times a year. But let's try it out. And they scaled all the production and advanced all the clinical trials, which is unheard of, right? You usually start in the laboratory, give a little piece out, and then this time we had big manufacturing operations already gone, and they licensed in products, and that's for example, Pfizer did, and Merck is doing that. They bought 2 companies to actually license in the antigen they're interested in, and so on. So that's what happens with the clinical scale-up. And so we have BioNTech, the 162B2 vaccine, they actually were still testing. The reason we only have 52 people, they were actually looking at 4 different kinds of viruses to put into their vector. It's not a vector, it's a lipid molecule. Up until like June, and then 2 days later, the government said, this is the one we like best, and the government said, here's $1 billion. Go ahead, go for it faster, further. And they said, yeah, we'll do that. The press release said basically 90% fewer self-identified and diagnosis cases in the vaccine trial cohort versus the one that got the placebo. That's huge. Now, don't forget, we're at patient number 94 who said I got sick. They're going to go to 164. So if you do all the math, and we're super unlucky. So we were super lucky on the first round and super unlucky on the second round. So everyone who got vaccinated now suddenly has the COVID. It could be as low as 50% efficacy, 47.5% efficacy. But it could be that nobody who got vaccinated, or in other words, 100% efficacy could also be true. So that's the range of what we know based on the press release. That's all we have to date. It's unfortunate they didn't release any scientific data, and they didn't do that because it wouldn't have been smart, right? You want to be able to get enough data in order to prove statistical significance without any question. If they'd opened up all the data, made it all available to us who were really interested, it would have hurt the statistical power of the trial. So they didn't do that, and that was smart. And my guess is they may not do that when we get to 164 either, because they want to look at longer term, and you'll see why in a second, especially longer term safety. So we may not know for 2-3 months. If the FDA said, no, it's only us going to look at it, you can't look at it, that'll be because we're interested in the statistics for even bigger populations. But there's a whole bunch we don't know. We don't know about transmission reduction. We don't know about durability. We don't know about population differences. We don't know about how severe the clamp down of the symptoms was, and we don't know what the long haul effects are, impact of the virus are either. So there's more we don't know than what we do know. But what we do know is really positive. So let's take a look at and work with what we do know. You asked earlier, David, about the different technologies, and right. This is a kind of an eye chart. Apologies. There are 5 basic technologies, and depending how you cut it, you could call it 8. But anyway, I call it 5. And there's 2 basic kinds of things. There's the workhorses that we use today, and that's the attenuated virus and the inactivated virus, right? Those are using cultured viruses. We put them in the lab, and attenuated viruses. What you do, if you think about what you've done with your flowering plants, back in the day, the flowering plants were sort of small and ugly, and we so slowly selected for them until they've gotten more and more beautiful, right? And they more and more different, types of plants that you can buy, and it's all exciting now. With the viruses, what we do is we start with something that's super potent, a full virus, and we slowly find those viruses that are a little bit weaker, and slowly but surely we get what they call an attenuated live virus. So it's still a live virus, but it's been super attenuated, so it's really sort of weak and floppy. And then we inject that in, and that doesn't give you, it's enough to give you an immune response, but isn't going to give you the disease. Well, there's a big risk in that, right? So suppose that big and floppy virus that you've worked on so long now replicates with a wild type virus, right? And it can bring you right back up in 1 generation to something that's super powerful again and kills you. So that's the sort of downside of using an attenuated live virus. You can actually, sadly, if you don't maintain the quality, it can get either 2 weeks, you don't get anything, or it can get really strong by mistake. And so right now, India is, believe it or not, India actually manufactures more vaccines than any other country in the world right now. And they wanted to kind of preserve their lead in that space. And so they said, we're going to work on the attenuated live virus because we got a hell of a lot of capability in the space. And so we're the only big manufacturer to go after the attenuated live virus. The inactivated virus, what you do there is you actually have the virus, you culture it up, and then you kill it. And you either kill it with UV light or you kill it with heat, and you denature some of those proteins, but hopefully those proteins are still there enough to be recognized by our body as being something that's foreign, being this virus, and that's how that's what you use, right? And it's dead. Now sometimes, sadly, we've had we haven't attenuated enough, or we haven't killed it enough, and it comes back and it comes back with a vengeance. That happened with a polio vaccine called the Cutter experience we had. That was a problem. So at any rate, Sometimes it's too weak; it doesn't do anything for you because you've killed off too much of it. Sometimes you haven't killed it enough, and those can be bad events. But this is most of what we use today. The cultured virus is most of what we use today to in our vaccines. These are our workhorses. And I thought that we would have a couple of these new genetic vaccines that weren't quite perfect. They had to manage them quite carefully, and they were partially effective, but not quite good. And we'd have to wait until we got to the cultured attenuated viruses or the inactivated viruses at scale, and you really have some power in the vaccine. I was wrong. What we found that we have very effective capabilities right in the genetic vaccine area. There was no way to predict this. We don't, as I said, I mean, we don't use this technology that much. It's not that much out there. Some of the viral vector areas, we have quite a bit of experience with Johnson & Johnson, but on DNA RNA, we don't have one vaccine yet in that space that's significant. So you can see with DNA RNA, the problem with them is they're really super fragile, right? It's a little piece of RNA. It barely holds together, within the cell. Then you take it out of the cell, and it's got nothing. So you got to freeze it and have ultra cold chains or even cryo level cold chains in order to keep it going. And the scalability we don't know. So that's the problem with DNA RNA. With viral vector proteins, the vector, you actually, as you know, you take out you use the vector. Like say a virus, you can use the measles vector. You can use other kinds of vectors that have capability to penetrate a cell, and then you switch out the protein. You switch out the genetic component, right? And that injects them what you want it to inject. And then in this case, it's just the small part of the virus, not the whole virus, it's a little part of it, injects into you, and you manufacture those proteins, and the body sees those continually, and then creates antibodies to those. So you're protected from the real virus. Right. And the subunit spike protein, same thing. Again, note that we're talking about the same thing each time, just with a different transport mechanism, right? So right. Each time we have the spike protein. There's not much variability here. We're making a huge bet on the spike protein being antigenic, and we were lucky. It pulled out. And so Moderna and Pfizer, DNA RNA. I'm sorry, they use messenger RNA. AstraZeneca, J&J, they use the viral vector. And in the future, you'll see Novavax and Sanofi, and those guys use the spike protein or viral-like proteins. That's what the chart looks like. Note China. China in this space, they've been ahead of us on the jump. They've had the jump on us from day one, right? They're probably in the best position right now. They've got 3 inactivated proteins. They missed the viruses. They missed the opportunity for genetic vaccines. They had to work with Pfizer and got into Pfizer through BioNTech with the viral vector. I'm sorry, with the messenger RNA technology. They have a viral vector vaccine that's in military use. So they're doing well compared to us. And Russia, interestingly, Russia actually used viral vector. They used both of them, but we have an Innovirus 5, Innovirus 2026. They use both vectors, which is unheard of, right? You don't want to. You've got a chance of cross-reactivity among the vectors, and they looked at 52 patients, and apparently, according to their data, it was fascinating. They got great antigenic response, which you'd expect because they're using 2 different vectors. Right. Plus, they didn't get any cross-reactivity. So amazing stuff, right? A really amazing technology. So now we have these vaccines, and the question is how good they are. And
so I got a quick question for you.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Please.
When you say on that last slide, you had with the DNA RNA virus or the spike protein, extreme cold chain required. What does that mean?
So yeah, the DNA RNA, that means for Pfizer, we're at a minus 70 degrees centigrade. That's minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. We're not talking about a chilly winter day. We're talking about you go out. We're talking about Antarctica wind chill factor, right? I mean, it is really, really cold, and it's so cold that when you open up the freezer, that it's all that smoke comes out. Right. You got to wear special hazmat suits. You cover yourself up with rubber gloves. You're talking about tongs, and if you keep that box open for more than 1 minute, and you do that more than twice a day, you've ruined the entire batch of vaccines. That's how cold it is.
Okay, so that's actually, so then, okay, so when you say like a cold chain, so I mean it's got to be frozen at manufacturing, it's got to be transported that way, it's got to be stored that way, it's got to be okay.
And you're measuring that, you're monitoring that every 15 minutes. You know, am I having an excursion? Am I still in cold chain control? Because after, if it unfreezes, you're talking about the efficacy going down in a matter of hours from 90% to 30%. So you're going to have to waste that stuff on a 2 to 4. So we transport our stuff at biologicals, for example. Usually get transported at 2 to 4 degrees, so just over the freezing, right? 0 is freezing, so 2 to 4 degrees. And they can't freeze, they can't get too hot. They gotta be right in the middle. And when we have to control at that level, we have about a 20% wastage. So -70, you can imagine what the wastage level. I mean, and that's why I was losing sleep, right? Because we were trying to figure out how we're going to transport Pfizer stuff. Geez, and Pfizer said, we'll take care of it. We got it. But the truth is, they got it to a certain extent, say to a big warehouse. But after that, it's got to go to all these other groups. They have to split up the vaccines, the vials. They don't have much time to do that. It's a challenge. It's going to be a huge challenge. Now with Moderna's only -20. That's dry ice. Believe it or not, we need so much dry ice, we're not going to have enough. So
that'll be the next shortage that hits us.
A freaking shortage of dry ice. I mean, you talk about, we'll talk about some of the shortage problems we've got. The dry ice is one of the that I did not expect. Now we got a shortage of dry ice. So, but having said that, it's a lot easier at -20 than -70. I mean, it just orders of magnitude easier. But yeah, so that's how cold it is.
Okay.
It's so cold. You breathe on this stuff, and your breath will freeze, and it'll tinkle on the stuff that the condensation in your breath will freeze before it hits the ground in front of you. That's how cold it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's if you're in a lab like this and you make a mistake with temperatures this cold, you have major problems.
Oh yeah.
So at any rate, here are the different ways we evaluate the vaccines, and let's go into this in some detail, because I think people will have to make a decision. Which one should I take? When should I take it? And the way we look at it is effectiveness. We look at safety. We look at durability, and we look at scalability. And we've read out on one of the points now, to a little bit of an extent, we know 90% seems to be about right. It looks like twice, and I was hearing early results, as I said, from other countries that was getting in the low 77, 80% for other technologies. So we seem to be we're probably going to have a pretty effective vaccine. Question is it safe? How long does it last once you inject it? And can we make enough of it so that we can immunize literally 5 to 6 billion people? 6.2 billion is what we need for herd.
Yeah, we've talked about that challenge, before.
Yeah, and now we'll have a little more detail. So here's effectiveness, and so what I did is I decided to run some numbers for you guys, and the first thing to understand is that the Pfizer and the other companies are going to select what they call a clinical endpoint, and it says this is how much. This is how, and against that metric, they're going to measure how good their vaccine is. And so on the bottom, I've got some metrics that we could choose, right? It says reduce mild symptoms. If you've got a cough and chills and vomiting or diarrhea, that's a mild symptom. It's great that you got rid of, you've moved from something that feels more like the flu to the sniffles, but it's not, it's a mild symptom.
Right.
On the other hand, you could actually reduce severe symptoms, or the timing of severe symptoms, or either the magnitude, how long they last, and that's a much more significant clinical endpoint, and because that actually lowers mortality rate. It reduces how many people have to go to the hospital, and that's a big endpoint. Unfortunately, in order to go fast, what we did is we said we want to look at mild symptoms. Anyone has a symptom, that's good enough for us. We're going to check it out, and if we stop that mild symptom, that's enough for us. That counts as efficacy. So when I first saw the Pfizer stuff, they didn't tell me how many severe symptoms they had stopped. Right? They only said over 90%. 94 total sample size. So I thought, okay, they probably had about 86, maybe even all 94. Had some symptom reduction, but what the heck were the symptoms? Was it just the sniffles, or was it the symptoms of the guys having, cardiac arrest?
Could this have just been cured with aspirin? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there was nothing there. Now Moderna said more. They said we checked. I think was it 92, and of those, 11 had severe symptoms. And if you look at their protocol, severe symptoms, that means, drop in oxygenation, means, organ failure. Those are big symptoms. So we're talking about, wow, we got rid of some big symptoms. So that was really, really exciting. So it looks like we may even have something very good for lowering the actual death rate. What we have not tested for, and no one is testing for, is whether it reduces transmission. And this is disappointing because transmission is much more effective. When you talk about lowering death rate, you're talking about something that goes linearly, right? When you're talking about lowering transmission, you're talking about something that reduces exponentially. And here's the example, right? Suppose you've got two factors you're looking at. One is the transmission rate. That's the R rate. We always talk about that, right? If R is like 3, which is about probably what it is for coronavirus, then after 10 generations, you're going to have about 100,000 infections from that first infection, right? And then we say, okay, fine, we've got 100,000 people who got infected. Now suppose we have this great vaccine that actually reduces the fatality rate. This is the infection fatality rate from 1% to 0.5%. Well, then you're going to go from 1,000 deaths to 500 deaths, right? That's a 50% reduction. That's great. We saved 500 people with the vaccine.
That's a good number, yeah.
It's a great number, right? But if we now let's take a look at transmission. If we reduced transmission by 50% and didn't change the fatality rate, right? Transmission, but not symptom. Then after 10 generations, instead of 100,000 infections, we would have only had 2,800. And then you say, fine, we keep the same death rate, 1% death rate. All of a sudden, you're down to 28 deaths.
Yeah, but
right?
it's 1% of a lower number, yeah.
1% of 2,800, 100 is 28 people. That's a 97% reduction. So you can, so these endpoints that people talk about, these are huge. They're really, really important. If you're talking about reducing the rate of general transmission at an individual level, that's the one you want. If you don't talk about the rate of death, then you probably want to think it over. What's the chance I'm going to go to the hospital? I'm in pretty good shape. Do we want to take the risk of having to, and so on. But if you're talking about transmission, you're talking about a big number. Now, here's what it looks like at a population. That's what an individual has to think about. Here's what it looks like at a population level. So we ran the numbers using Monte Carlo simulation. This is both, and these are pretty good numbers. We're using a large number of data sets for running the numbers many, many times. And here's what it comes out to be. So if you have no vaccine, that's an RT of 1 point. In this case, we used a number of 1.2, which is actually what the RT level is today in the country. If you look at every state, and you can go to a website called RT Live, and they will tell you, in your state, you've got an RT effective reproductive rate of 1%, 2%. Right now in Michigan, we're at 1.2. So this is a good number. It's sort of reflective of where we're at. So notice what we have is today we're between 1,000 and 1,500 deaths a day, right? We're 1,300 or so across the country. My projection was that early January we're going to be at around 3,000. That's a lot more deaths. And then because we're getting lucky, we're going to start going down that slope, right? So the scenario is consistent. And now we're going to introduce vaccines. So what does that look like? And the answer is, if you've got a reduction in transmission, it sort of follows along pretty closely. And you can see what I've done is here's the cumulated vaccinated population. This is actually what Operation Warp Speed is projecting they will be able to do with just the Pfizer vaccine. Now that we have the Moderna vaccine in addition, we may be able to increase the speed of vaccination. We'll have to look at that. You'll see why in a little bit. But if we were at 20 million vaccinated to 102 million vaccinated to 195 million vaccinated, by the time you get to like 200 million vaccinated, you're talking about getting pretty close to herd immunity. When you get over 250, 260, then you are at herd immunity and the virus dies. And this is happening. You can start to see the separation of the gray line, the purple line, and the blue line. You see the separation that's occurring there. So by the time you get to April of 2022, if you've vaccinated that many people, you don't have you've literally killed off most of the virus. Now, if you only have a 50%, that purple line is the 50% effective in reduction of transmission. That's the one way, the scenario that we looked at from 100,000 infected to 2,800. Then we get to 625 deaths. And if we have none of that, if we just do what we're doing today with just the way we're working with our masks and our
Messing around like we are,
then we're going to be about 1,200. It doesn't go away. It keeps going until they can't find anyone anymore who doesn't have some antibodies in them. So that's what happens, and you can see that this reduction in transmission is significant. If it's really there, well, we won't know it, sadly, because we haven't tested for it. It requires actually testing people, testing a whole cohort of people every day to see whether they've got a transmitted virus, and if they have, how fast to transmit it and who else they are able to transmit to. And it requires, quite a bit more control than we do it, and it's more expensive and it's slower. So we didn't do that test. But if we had, we'd see it. We'll see that effect anyway based on the data, right? If we see an inflection point where there's a huge separation between the vaccine and no vaccine, that'll happen in November. So if we see a big inflection point in November, we know that we've got a vaccine is impacting transmission.
So I guess question here, because because every time we've talked before, you've been pretty consistent with, vaccines available, late spring, into the summer, into the fall of next year.
Yeah.
So one of the things that kind of jumped out at me from the press release that Pfizer did was that they're still planning on tracking these groups for 2 more years.
Yes.
Because of, sometimes there are side effects from things and sometimes they don't show up right away. So, I mean, I guess that's the other part of this is, when do we know that it's safe to go ahead and get these things? I mean, you know me, I'm not one of the, I ain't getting no vaccine with a microchip, but
I'll talk about safety in a second.
Okay.
And you'll see where we're at, and you can make a decision. So what's interesting about the efficacy question is that here's what happens if it turns out we don't have something that affects transmission, but we do have something that's demonstrated we do have, and that's symptomology, right? It matters how much disease severity you stop and how much. And so if you have a 50% reduction in symptoms that are severe, you can see that, again, the purple line is what happens. We're down by about 1/3. And if we were talking about a 90% reduction in symptoms, we're down to 481. And so again, it's between 1/3 and 2/3, but we're not getting rid of the virus, right?
Well, yeah, because I mean, at this point, you're basically just turning people into asymptomatic carriers.
That's right. And that can be dangerous, right?
Yeah. I feel fine, therefore I'm going out.
I feel fine, therefore I'm going out, or I don't feel that bad, and the virus keeps reproducing, and it slowly but surely gets resistant against the vaccine, or actually likes the vaccine's environment. It actually, I call it vaccine enhancement, and all of a sudden you get a much more powerful superbug that's out there that you can't control. So yeah,
then it goes and lives in Bob's knees again, like all superbugs do.
That's right. So this is the issue. So now. The next big area you asked about was safety, and safety. One more thing, and that's the dosing and routes of administration. These do make a difference. Johnson & Johnson is going to come out with a vaccine if they're successful, probably in kind of early February timeframe, February 1st timeframe, and that only will require 1 dose. So if you're early on in the vaccine, you only require 1 dose for immunogenicity. You don't have to wait 28 days, 35 days, which is what you'd have to wait for Pfizer. Pfizer, you need to wait 28 days, and until you get a lot of sufficient immunogenicity, and for Moderna, it's actually 35 days. In the case of J&J, you get 1 shot, and 7 days later you're ready to go. So that's a significant reduction in the early days of vaccine control of a virus, and you want to get those single doses out as fast as you can, because not only does it impact the speed at which you're going to impact the virus, it also doubles your capacity, right? If you got to use 2 of those doses of Moderna, you only need 1 of the J&J ones. You're talking about a lot more capacity to vaccinate people, and you get a lot better adherence, because it turns out that we're not very good at coming back for our booster shots. Even me.
You don't say.
It's a problem.
I'm stunned. The nation that's proven that it can't even wear a mask would have trouble coming back for a booster shot.
Yeah, sadly. So for symptom reducing vaccine, basically the speed of which you have a single dose versus double dose can impact death rates by about 20%. And if you can get a transmission blocking vaccine, it can drive herd immunity speed by 10 to 20%. And that's really where you want to be. So that eventually the double doses do catch up with the single dose over time, but it takes a few months. You can see in this case it takes about 4 or 5 months. The other big issue is routes of administration. What we found in animal models, and our best models for COVID are macaques. They're human primates, non-human primates, excuse me. And basically what we found was that we had a lot of trouble with intramuscular injections in terms of immunogenicity and getting an immune response. We were able to get an immune response in the nose, which is important. But the other place the virus attacks is the lungs. And it was very hard for us to get upper respiratory impact. And what it turned out that misting and nasal sprays do a lot better job of getting into the lungs. And it's harder to control the dose because everyone inhales a little bit differently, and the spritz is some,
right.
It's a complicated dosing mechanism. Trust me, I did a lot of work in asthma. I was like, oh my god, you had to get just the right amount, and you had to inhale just the right amount, and you had to get just enough right amount of powder, and all that stuff. It starts to get complicated, but we now know how to do that. We've got a flu vaccine that goes through misting capability, and we did this with COVID, and it turns out that you do get that response in the lungs, which is great. And of course, the more flexible, the more options you got, the better chance you get to be flexible and then choose different routes of administration for different people, for different with different ingredients, and you got a lot more capability, a lot more flexibility, a lot more response you can have. So that's what dosing looks like.
So what I'm hearing is just set up misting tents like they have at raves.
That's right.
And send everybody through them, and we'll be good.
yeah, either that or you just sort of bend over and walk through a tent.
Right.
Come out the other side, and those are the options. Yep, exactly. So, but you asked about safety, and safety is really critical. And so let's take a look at that. Basically safety is all about signal detection. You want to be able to determine very faint signals about whether or not something's, you're getting an adverse event or not. And the adverse event, you're really interested in two things. The first thing is, how serious is it? One bad adverse event can shut down a whole trial. Remember when AstraZeneca was shut down for like 6 weeks? Mm-hmm. That's because they had one bad adverse event. And remember, with adenovirus, we were worried about what they call ADE, which is antibody-dependent enhancement. That particular lady had an infection in her central nervous system that was very representative of an ADE event. And because we'd only vaccinated, at the time, about 50,000 people with that, well, even slightly less than that, half of that, so 25,000 people, and we found one of those events, you multiply that through by 7 billion, you're going to get lots of those events.
Right.
You don't want that. So that's this signal detection. How early?
Well, yeah. So what I've read so far is the most common result is they said it feels like a bad hangover. Yeah.
Oh, well, and I shouldn't tell everybody this, but the first one you get isn't so bad. It's the booster that's the man.
way to encourage people to not get that second dose there.
But the booster's a tough one.
Hey, anybody who's ever been out drinking with us will be fine.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, what we start off with is, how frequent is the adverse event, and then over what period of time. And so initially, when you start off these vaccines, the reason you only look at like 50 people at once, 100 people at once, a few hundred people at once, is because you want to detect if it's more than 1 in 1,000, and you want to detect if it happens really fast. Because if it happens really fast in a lot of people, you're not going to use it as a vaccine. You're going to kill off the option. And that's the area down here in the black box, right? Then right now, we've now tested for, initially the FDA said a month of data, that's enough. Well, there's a lot of risk in a month. If you move from 1 month to 2 months, it turns out that in vaccine production, we're most concerned about all the adverse events that occur before the 42-day period. In other words, the 6 week number. Most of the adverse events that you're going to see will occur, on or before that 6 week period.
Okay.
To the vaccine. So the FDA, remember, it came out and said, 1 month's too short. Let's go 2 months. And President Trump said, wait a minute, you guys told me and everybody else in this deal that it's going to be 1 month, which would have meant I would have had a result before my election. And now you're changing the goalposts. The truth is, that was probably a wise move.
I mean, it seems like it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, because there would have been a lot of experts coming out and saying, "Wait a minute, you only went 30 days on the safety. Yeah, I want to see more data." And then all the public would have said, "Oh shoot, maybe we rushed this a little bit too fast." And then they wouldn't have had, see how important it is that the public is trusting the vaccine in a second. That it was the right move. In my opinion, it was the right move. And I talked to a lot of guys, and in the field, and I know a lot of guys in the field. We talk all the time, and we were worried about the 30-day, and we felt good about 42, and we felt really good about our 2 months. WHO on a worldwide basis, they want to go for 3 months. So we're moving faster than WHO and the rest of the world, because we only want to go 2 months. And we'll see 3-month data fast enough as people start getting vaccinated, right? And we'll see it on 20 million people by April next year. So that'll be great. But there is there's also a scenario that says we're going to see quite a few adverse events, but it'll take more than 3 months to appear. That does happen, and if it does, then we'll have to kill the drugs won't be taken. They won't be the right thing. It may be that.
Fred?
Yes.
Have they talked about how they're going to roll the vaccination out?
Oh yes, I'll talk about that in a lot of detail. Yes, the answer is yes, and we'll get into that in a second if that's good for you. I can jump to it if you want me to, but I just want.
No.
Okay, and so basically there are two kinds of adverse events. And so this is what you have to think of as a person, right? How frequent does it happen? How serious is it? And how much time have we allowed to elapse in these tests to make sure that it's safe? And basically, I think that in a few months we'll have enough tests that we'll see the rare adverse events that they occur. We'll be in a detection limit. You can see the detection limits that I've mapped out, right? Certainly by 2022, you're in a risk area that's very, very small.
Right.
So let's take that's at an individual level. At a population level, there are two kinds of big adverse events, right? The first big adverse event you can have is when it's generally dispersed across the population. This is like an allergy, right? You take it, a young person who's in great health gets the allergy, and they're going to have an adverse event. They may go to anaphylactic shock. The same issue is true about someone who's 70, out of shape, and has diabetes, right? They'll have the anaphylactic shock. It's due to the allergy, and it's pretty evenly spread across the population. It's not because you've got a certain characteristic of the host beyond the allergy. And you can see what happens. The purple line is when you've got 10% of the population who cannot take the virus, the vaccine, because of adverse event. And the light blue line is when you only have 1% of the population that can't take it, right? And you can see that slowly but surely people figure it out, and you can still get enough people vaccinated to reach about the same effect, whether these people are included in the mix or not.
Right.
Now, the other kind of adverse event is the one you really want to watch out for. And that's the adverse event that impacts the people who are most likely to die to begin with. So you're talking about, heavy set guys who have diabetes, heart condition, and this puts them over the edge, right? In that case, and if that happens 1% of the time, you can see that we go from 1,200 people saved to about 485. It's not too bad, and in this case, it's about 385. So it's about 30% worse, but it's manageable. But if you're talking about something that affects 10% of the population in the high risk groups of that population, you're going to have to eliminate those really high risk people who are likely to die from the vaccine. You're going to have a really high death rate, and you go from 1,200 to only 1,100. You're only saving 100 extra lives after all the work you've done with the vaccine, right? That's a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want the cure to be worse than what you're curing.
At least not for the population who's getting it,
right?
But yeah. So that's going to be what we're looking for, right? If it's an allergy effect, it's because you have an adjuvant, a reagent in the mix, an ingredient in the mix. You can slowly remove those, figure that out. But if it's a fundamental factor that's impacting a population because of the way the vaccine works fundamentally, and the characteristics, the genotypic and phenotypic characteristics of the host, as we would say, then you're talking about something that's not going to be nearly as effective, and you're going to really have to watch out. There'll have to be special tests done. Do you have the right genetic characteristics? Let me look at your health record. Oh, you're on this medicine. Let's take you off that medicine for 6 months. that's a much tougher vaccine to manage, if that makes sense.
So basically, what my takeaway from this is, I'll be looking to get it sometime around my birthday at the end of April.
We'll get into no. Yeah, the answer is you might if you are a healthcare worker, frontline worker, or in a nursing home.
Gotcha.
But if you're not in one of those three categories, you might not.
Well, hey, no, because actually my whole point with that is, I want to see that 3 months. I want to see, that I want that data coming out and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of us will. And in fact, you'll see that data in a second. So one of the last issues, there's two more issues. One is durability, and basically we don't know how long this vaccine is going to last. Right now, we can say with some assuredness that the vaccines that have been injected to date seem to still be working after a 9-month period, which is all we've had experience with. And if that continues, the reason we look at 1 and 2 years out, we look at safety, but we also look at IgG levels. So this is immunoglobulin G.
Mm-hmm.
And we also look at some other immunologic factors to see how much they're still in the body, right? And that indicates the thing's still active. We still have an elevated antibody here, and so we can consider that vaccine is still working. It doesn't actually really work that way. Sadly, we're cheating the system again a little bit. We should use much more accurate tests than we are using for that endpoint. We should actually be looking at neutralizing antibodies, not just antibody levels. That's too bad, but there's still some relationship, at least between antibody levels and neutralizing antibodies. So we're going to see some impact. If we really want to do this right, we'd actually look at specific antibodies that we're looking for. So, and you can see the difference. The flu, if you get the flu shot, you're done in 150 days. Basically, everything all the impact on your immune system is over in just 150 days. So you got to, if you don't re-inject the next year, because the flu is seasonal, you're able to get through the whole season. But if you don't re-inject in September, you're not protected anymore. And if you're elderly, you should probably get the flu shot twice a year. Twice a season, right? You probably get it in September, and then you should probably get it again in January.
So how does this, I guess, how does this correlate to, the stories that are hitting where people are getting it a second time?
Yeah, it's a critical question.
After 4 or 5, 6 months. So, I mean, if that's, the antibodies are gone and they get reinfected, how does this change that?
So that's a great question. The other big question is, can they find?
I'll give myself a gold star. Thank you.
Yeah, but basically, that's a great question, and we're looking at that very carefully. The challenge is you've got to demonstrate that it's a true reinfection, and we've only demonstrated that about 5 or 6 times, a handful of patients. Because what you do, Dave, is you look at you actually have to take a genetic code of the COVID that infected you the first time, right? And then if you get another infection, you take that, you compare the genetic codes, and they have to be different. Now we only, as you know, we're not doing nearly enough testing, so we got no idea.
Right.
Where they do enough testing, where they are looking at genetic codes in Europe, for example, they've done a lot more than we have. They found that they have found in a handful of patients that they're getting different COVID infections, and that's happening within a 4-month period. And if that happens regularly, even after you've taken the shot, so at the first shot, generally these mRNA vaccines will get you to the same level of infection as you would have if you got the disease. You take the second booster shot, and you're talking about a significant, kind of order of magnitude level more of the antibodies in your system than you would have if you'd just gotten the infection. So we're hoping that the extra boost from the booster is going to prevent that, because you can see the decline, how that curve looks. It goes a little steep slope, starts slow and goes fast. If it turns out that we have differences in durability, so you take the shot, you're good for life, and Bob takes the shot, and 3 months later they look at his antibody level and say, Bob, you got to take another shot, and you go, gosh darn, really? Well, Dave didn't. That could happen. It could be variable. And that's harder to manage, right? Because then you got to start testing everybody to find out whether the antibodies are still there. And then if they are still there, you're good. But if they're not, you better take another booster. And that's expensive, but that might happen. We don't know yet. I think it's likely originally I was predicting we probably have to take a shot every 1 to 2 years, but given how effective this thing is, maybe it will be for a lifetime. We just don't know. We have to kind of wait. And you can see my original arrows, or kind of a year to 2 years. You probably, in other words, what happened with SARS is after 2 years, you still have enough antibody level, but by year 3, you're starting to get reinfections. And so you want to take the shot in year 2 before you take the risk in year 3, if that makes sense. So, yeah, with flu again, same thing, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's it. Now, and this is about serology. We talked a little bit about that. You might have to actually, look at the antibody levels and understand where you are to manage your own vaccine if we only have a partially effective and durable vaccine. Now, scalability. This is another critical factor. And this chart on one side shows how manufacturable it is, how scaled is the environment so far. AstraZeneca can right now produce 6 million vaccines a year. That's sort of India can do 8 million. I'm sorry, 8 billion doses, billion with a B. Merck can do, as I recall, 3 billion, Novavax can do 2 billion, and then you have Pfizer, Moderna, Sanofi, J&J that can do 1 billion, Russia can do 300,000. That gives you a sense of the scale here. China can do something about 1.2 billion doses a year with their current capacity. The size of the circle indicates how many people have been tested with the vaccine, give you a sense of how likely it is it will be approved.
Okay.
And then whether a dotted line means it's not going to be available now, but it will be available eventually. That means, kind of within, certainly by 2020, within 2022. And then the colors are the different technologies. So you can get a sense of where we are, and you can see, again, China is well positioned to become the vaccine producer of the world. India needs to catch up. Merck is a company to watch, but they're only in phase 1 with what they've got. They've got 2 viruses that they bought from Austria and Switzerland, as I recall, and then Novavax and Sanofi also have good capability. And that's
I almost hate to ask the question, but it feels like it's a question that needs to get asked. Are people going to trust a vaccine that comes out of China?
Yeah, or out of Russia.
Oh yeah, I realize that's a loaded question and not one you can really answer, but that's.
Well, what's going to be interesting is over the next couple of years, vaccines will be a currency, right? If you've got excess production of a vaccine and can start to say to Angola, we'd really like to have a few more diamonds or a little bit more chromium, please. We got these vaccines, are they worthwhile? China is much better positioned to play that game than we are, because they control their production. They've got it all centralized. They know what their capacity is. They know what the needs are. We've got it more fragmented, right? Because we've got the private industry and
us darn capitalists.
Yes, we're capitalists. We're going to make money on this deal, but if it kills us, it may well. But so well, we've got silos, right? So Pfizer knows what its situation is, Moderna knows what its situation, but it's hard to aggregate all that to understand what the true situation is and be able then to kind of negotiate, especially if you have to buy them, in the open market from your own companies versus kind of just saying, we'll take those.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we'll see you next year.
Let us know when the next batch is ready.
And so China has actually changed their Belt and Road initiative to a Belt and Health Silk Road initiative, and they're already starting to say to countries around them, you want some vaccine, let's play nice with us. And Russia's doing the same thing. 40 countries with Russia, I think more than that with China already. So interesting, right? We're starting to see that movement, and if we mess this up, right now our business is second to none, right? In the world, the United States is when you go into negotiations, say we're a U.S. business, that carries a lot of weight, and if we keep embarrassing ourselves with COVID, my worry is that we won't have that extra little oomph when we go into negotiation with countries or with other companies. We won't have that credibility. We'll have to build that back up again, and that costs money. And that trust level, that strategic advantage, that's probably worth 20% of your business, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where we are with scalability. And so to recap, basically, wow, right? Holy cow, this has been amazing. Perfect execution, incredible speed, 3 long shot bets that you never would have guessed were going to pay off, that we were going to have a genetic revolution. We go from months to days to research and licensing, then we go to years to months clinical development. All those things paid off. Amazing. right? The data matters, and we don't really have the data. We've got now a second result from Moderna since I talked to Harvard, which is exciting. It means that there's suggestive evidence this is more than just a shot in the lucky shot. Is we got a consistent reproducible result. Phase 3 results have not been made available beyond the regulator. And everything we're hearing about is basically from the CEO talking to his investors, right? So you got to take this with a big grain of salt. But so far, so good. I'll take it. Right now, I'll take the good result. And it's really, really early days, right? And there are the unknowns that we have are because we chose to make them unknown and not to know them in order to go faster. And so there is a little bit more risk in the space right now than there is with a vaccine that comes out like for mumps and so on, or measles that we've tested for, like for example, with shingles, we watched that for 1.6 years, for HPV, almost 2 years, just doing observational studies before we released it to the public. Here we're talking about going right to it. And of course, the earliest path to normalcy and herd immunity, absolute earliest, and that's only for the United States, is kind of Q1 2022, and it will likely take a lot longer for a whole bunch of other reasons beyond just the vaccine technology. And for the world, we're talking still 5, 6, 7 years before we can get 6 billion people, to a point where we're not having to worry about this too much. So the first question is, how do we reduce the level of the vaccine before the level of virus before the vaccine? Because we're going to be at 3,000 when in early January.
Right.
How do we get that down? And the second question is, how do we increase the use of the vaccine? That's increasing the slope. So how do we reduce the periodicity, and how do we reduce the slope? And now the question you raised, Dave, is gosh, how do we take this thing? So we got the scientific breakthrough. The answer is, gosh, we got a road to hoe before we even get the vaccine. And I was looking at kind of the next administration, whether it's the original Trump administration regrouping or whether it's Biden's administration. It doesn't matter much, frankly. We're going to have problems, right? Virus is an exponential growth. We're looking at doubling rates of every 10, 12 days now. That could go to 5. That's not good.
It's crazy. Like I said, just every article is almost like a no shit moment.
Yeah, this is, sadly, and we're getting into Thanksgiving, we're getting into Christmas, getting New Year's, getting super spreader events. Test data, we have no idea. We're so low on the testing we need to do versus what to control this virus. We don't even know what we're fighting, where we're fighting it, how to fight it. We got nothing. We got nothing, right? We it's the invisible enemy because we haven't tested it to expose it. Economy right now, 40% of the population, sadly, is in depression. We're gonna have people losing their homes because they can't. And I'm really worried about that. And I hope Congress gets their crap together in the lame duck. And they had a session tonight, and they're still, it's still going to be tough to get it passed, anything passed. But I'm really hoping we're going to get something done, at least something. And President Trump wants something, senators want something, Democrats, the House wants something a little bit more. They should be able to find something, for goodness sake, right? You'd think between $1 trillion here and $2 trillion there,
yeah, exactly,
some middle ground. Geez, but if they don't get their stuff together, it's going to be really bad. We're going to have permanent scarring in the economy. Hospitals are completely overwhelmed, even if they're not overwhelmed in terms of having tents and portable morgues outside. They're still overwhelmed because these people have been working like hell for 9 months, right? I mean, these guys are working double shifts. They're having, these guys actually wear pictures of themselves when they're taking care of the patients because they have so much PPE on, you can't tell who you're talking to. That's what and you're having to take that stuff off, put it back on. It's exhausting.
Well, wasn't you that said the hot new item was going to be T-shirts with your picture on it?
Yeah. God, that's depressing.
I think they're already doing it.
We're doing that in healthcare already. I hadn't thought of that, but that's sort of where we're at. And we're still rationing PPE. We can't seem to manufacture enough masks. We can't manufacture enough wipes. I mean, you got to be kidding me. after 9 months, we can't get our crap together so we can get enough masks for every person.
Yeah, it was crazy. I did a shipped order over the weekend, and the guy that was doing the order, that was shopping, messaged me, and he was like, "Hey, you didn't have them on your list, but they just dropped like a couple pallets of Lysol wipes. You want a couple?"
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sign me up, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
It turns out though the chemicals aren't the problem. The wipes all come from Malaysia and
Yeah.
China. It's
It's
all
the
those
supply
fibers.
chain. Yeah.
Those fibers are actually pretty hard to get and they're all contracted to Clorox and Ricket Benkaiser for the next 5 years. We can't put new new chemicals in. So at any rate, don't get me started. Then we have vaccines, super constrained deployments. The question is, if you were the boss, what would you do? Would you rely on the new big weapon, the atomic bomb? Would you sort of wait for a while and then say, hey, we got the atomic bomb, let's use it? Would you close the economy, or at least shut down parts of it here and there, or would you redeploy with NPI and with non-pharmaceutical intervention or testing? What would you do?
Honestly, I look at what New Zealand's done. I look at what Australia's done, and as painful as it was, it's also a lot shorter than the pain and suffering that we've gone through. I mean, Australia locked down for, what was it, 4 months?
Yeah.
And literally, like, you could not leave your house for more than an hour a day. You could not, go more than 2 to 3 miles away from your house. And it was only for things like shopping and that kind of stuff. And it sucked, but 4 months later, they have 0 cases.
Yeah.
And they have resumed, quote unquote, normalcy. Whereas this, this kind of stopgap half-assing it that we've been doing.
Yeah, we sort of gone up and then got up and then.
Yeah, it's not. We're not doing what we need to do because we're only taking kind of half-step measures, whether it be for the sake of politics or the sake of practicality or the sake of just reality. That's fine, but it's like I said, you've got. I live in Macomb County, and Macomb County right now has the highest infection rate in the Metro Detroit area.
Yep.
I saw a graph earlier that it was like, it's less than 7% in the city. It's at 17% out here. And it's, this is, again, not trying to be too, but this is a red area, when it comes to how people voted and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people don't want to wear masks, want to argue with people about wearing them, and it's tough.
Yeah. Well, so it's sort of a trick question. The answer is it's not a question of or, it's a question of and. You want to use every weapon right now, right? Because you're talking about.
I was going to go with D, all of the above.
All of the above. That's it, right? If we don't get control of it now, we're going to have a death rate that's off the charts in February. So we have to. So what Whitmore did is she used early. The early trigger events, didn't wait for deaths to occur, didn't wait for hospitalization. She said, here's our case rate, here's our total infection rate. And so I got to close down stuff now. And so she actually, I know it's going to be painful, but she actually, from a health and actually even economy standpoint, not for everybody, but for Michigan as a whole, she did the right thing.
Well, and I mean, for people that are, balking at what just happened here, take a look at what the California governor just did. I mean,
or New York, right? They want to have their own FDA in New York.
Dude, I mean, the governor of California came out today and said, oh, by the way, we're going on full lockdown, and it's not going to be in a week. It starts tomorrow.
Yeah. That's when things are bad, right?
Yep.
He's been told. The guys at Stanford, they ran the numbers and said, oh my God. And that's what happened. Yeah. It doesn't take much because once you get the exponential growth, you're in big trouble. Yep. So the answer is all. And here's what. I gave this talk to both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign. Doesn't matter who wins. The answer is the same thing has to be done, right? The first thing you have to do is you got to have a unified strategy. People have to be talking about the same stuff.
And apparently you have trouble with this font.
Yes, you're right. I don't. My computer. I didn't. I don't support the Poppins font. You caught me. Yeah, but it looks beautiful when it's printed. In their back environment. I don't have it on my emulated IBM environment. I'm using. Apologies. But come to think of it, I haven't plugged my computer in. I better make sure I don't lose you in the middle of things. So there we go. At any rate. number one, have to have a national strategy. It's not going to be good enough to have states that have then, offsetting strategies, especially if they're right next door to you. And so that's what's been happening.
It's like, it's like the old, the no smoking section of airplanes.
Yeah, all drifts. No, it doesn't work out really well. And you saw that, right? And so you need to have real consistent metrics. People understand, okay, we hit a certain metric, and the whole country says, oh, we're hit this level, and therefore we do this and that, and we have to redo the CDC. The CDC's made enough bad mistakes that we have to get some. Sadly, we're going to have to probably change some of that leadership out. Second is we have to have no kidding, every day, every American gets their N95 mask. And, that means that maybe P&G stops making Pampers and starts making masks. It means that Kimberly Clark starts making masks. People who know how to use woven product goods and weld those goods to rubber bands and because this is getting ridiculous. We should have enough stuff that we don't have to have healthcare workers reusing their masks for 17 straight times and violating all their SOPs. That's just not acceptable. Same thing with testing. We have to have ubiquitous home testing, and the FDA's balked at it. The reason they balked at it isn't because we don't have great home tests. It's because they're worried they're going to lose the data. Right? Some of these home tests, everyone says, "Oh, I'm positive. Better not tell anybody," and they don't lose the data. And so they're terrified that if they give everyone home tests and let them do what they want to do based on the results of those tests, they don't trust the people. And so, here's what you get. You go to your doctor. 2 days later, you find out you've infected Aunt Mary, in the meantime, and she has a bad case, and you can't. So you have to trust people to do the right thing, and they will. I mean, the vast majority, certainly more than who are walking around not knowing whether they're infecting everybody, are going to act right. So you gotta have this ubiquitous testing. You gotta have enough quarantine capabilities, isolation facilities, so you can isolate these people appropriately. Then you gotta take what Operation Warp Speed gave you, and try to go to warping the warp speed, right? And go even faster. If you can, and as safe as possible. You got to have we have to rebuild the trust. You'll see that in a second. You have to have an infrastructure that you can reuse over and over again, because we're going to have these pandemics again and again. And then you have to have a point of view of saying, the economy and health work together. If you're really super sick, you're not going to be really productive. GDP is still going to suffer. So let's figure out a way to work both of them side by side. And part of that is, if you think about, I'm working a lot with medical doctors and epidemiologists, and they represent almost all the input that the government has right now. If we had business guys in there, we had people with different points of view saying, hey, this is going to happen here. It was more balanced in terms of all the work that the COVID task forces are doing. That could be something good, because we could figure out how to balance this better, right? Instead of all one side, then we come up with policy, and the guys say, "Whoa, that doesn't look very smart." We have to have a bigger team. Oh, I didn't realize I had the red thing there. I have trouble with this font. Please change. So you just read it off. You didn't. I could have. Oh, well, I have to take out that font off. Apologies.
No, I didn't. I wasn't just making that up off the top of my head. I saw you.
You saw that. I didn't even realize that red was there. Apologies. So at any rate, those are the 7 essential programs. And if we do that, then we'll have the curve that looks like this, right? We came up, and now we're going to start working our way back down again. If we do these 7 things, we'll be in much better shape. Here's the way it's going to roll out. You'll see that, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the EUAs, a lot of the emergency use authorizations that the FDA are going to provide, and the launch of these products is going to occur during the lame duck session of the Congress and a lot of the state House and Representatives and Senates. And that's a challenge, because we have to have fast decision makers in place who are empowered to say, it's a go, here's how we're going to roll out this vaccine. And right now people are sort of figuring things out in transition. And we could sort of start at having to start over again, right? And that could cost us like 45 days. And meanwhile, 3,000 people are dying a day. That's 125,000 people that are dying off as we're figuring out how to transition our
right
and federal governments properly. And so that's a challenge. So the other big thing is that we're going to have these huge spikes happening just as we say, gosh, the vaccine's almost there, almost there, almost there. And there's going to be a real big incentive for producers and regulators to kind of cut corners at the last minute. So some interesting drama is going to happen, right? And you can see the death rate is climbing up. I don't think I think 3,000 deaths a day overwhelms about 10% of the hospitals of the country. And that's going to then, in those parts of the country, you're going to see double to, believe it or not, up to 10 times the death rates that are normal, because we just can't treat all the people that are coming in. And I think I told you that, people in Missouri are being flown to Iowa, people in South Dakota are being flown into Montana. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where we can't fly people around, and people are just going to be said, and we're sorry, but got nothing for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know that, again, getting back to, El Paso, God, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, the mayor there requested the use of military hospitals for non-COVID patients, because even at that point, their hospitals were getting overwhelmed.
Absolutely. So and once you get to like 7,000 deaths a day, at that point, you're really overwhelming everything in the United States. And that's, that would be a tragedy. Hopefully we won't get to that point. So the big thing is, we now are getting into the point of the science has come through. Now let's figure out how to get everyone vaccinated, right? And that's the fourth big bet. So we changed the science, we changed the processes for developing the science and doing the research. Now we actually have to deploy.
Well, yeah, because this is the point that you had brought up before was, isn't it? I believe it's no vaccine has ever been produced in excess of 100 million doses.
That's right. Yeah. we got a ways to go. Yeah, and now we're trying to get to and now we're trying to do that times 7, times 8, times, actually the number is times 60.
Yeah, I was gonna say times 50 or 60.
Yeah, and we'll now I could stop here. We could have another session later, or we can keep going. What do you like? You want to talk about the fourth bet, or are you guys tired out?
Bob, I know this was your question of what you were interested in.
Yeah, I mean, let's roll. Let's
you guys want to roll it? All right, let's roll it. Here we go. So hold your breath. Here we're going into the D-Day. So how do you get to vaccination? And there are 4 big challenges. How do you scale up the new technology, as you point out, Dave, 60-fold? How do you then speed? And that's the scale up question. Then you have to do that really, really fast. We're talking about, and the problem is the old supply chain is super rigid. It's old and fragmented. People aren't working with each other. We're sort of cobbling it together at the last minute. We're figuring stuff out. Then we have to manage all this complexity, and then we have to convince the non-believers, because the only way you get the benefit is you actually do the vaccination.
Right.
And so here it all goes, right? You go from raw material, sub-assembly, finished product, all the way to distribution. And here's the first part of that: 60-fold increase. And right now we have the capacity. We produce 287 million doses a year, right? And we've got 10% capacity, 15% capacity. We have about 35 million doses that are available. Because the rest of that production is being used for producing flu vaccines, pneumonia vaccines, shingles vaccines, and so on. All we have really available is 35 million doses. And we have to get to 480 million doses for the United States by the end of next year. So this is how it's going to roll out: 25 million doses a year per month per company. Now we've got 2 companies, not just Pfizer, doing that. So we're probably going to get to 100 million doses like we thought we would, especially if Johnson & Johnson kicks in and AstraZeneca kicks into the supply. And you can see that basically we think the EUA is going to come out in December. The healthcare workers are going to come out first, and we'll talk about how it's going to roll out, because that's the big question about it. Now, this is the problem is it's not just about the antigen, right? You also have to bring along all the adjuvants, all the reagents, all the glasses, all the stoppers, all the injectors, all the needles, and you maybe have to do some serology testing, understand what the level of antibiotic level is. And when you look at all the rest of the supply chain, that's 93% constrained. We only have 7% availability right now of the glass we need, or of the injectors that we actually need to do all this stuff. We're not ready for this, basically. And then the vaccine comes together, the adjuvants, the reagents, the glass stoppers all come together in one big packet, and that has to be managed at -7, between -20 and now -20 and now and up to -70 supply chain, all the way until it's injected into your arm, and that has to then move along with the kit. And remember all the problem we were having with the test kits, where we did had reagent in one place and the swabs in another. This multiply that problem by like a million.
Right.
So it's like off the charts in terms of complexity. And that then goes to 64 different jurisdictions, which all manage different ways. We got 50 states, the District of Columbia, 8 territories, and the tribal nations, right? Each of them managing slightly differently with different policies, all wanting to have vaccine right away, please. So, and then you're trying to push that through an unscaled, fragmented global supply chain, because you got to get these adjuvants. We're not talking about stuff like, oh, we need a little bit of alcohol. We're talking about like IF newt stuff, right? Talking about the stamens of a plant that only opens its petals once every 5 years in the middle of the backwoods of Malaysia. I'm serious. We're talking about stuff that costs literally, billions of dollars to produce a few ounces of. That's the sort of stuff we're talking about. And yeah, for example, we need limulus blood in order to understand whether or not things are contaminated or not. Now, luckily, we've got a way of doing that synthetically. That was developed last year, but we kill every horseshoe crab on the planet to figure out whether we got the vaccine appropriate or not and bacterially protected. We don't have enough stoppers. We don't have enough. The glass we're using, we're mining out of Greenland because it's got to be so pure, and it can't break and shatter. It can't leach into the vaccine, right? All that stuff comes together. So at any rate, we're having we don't have enough surgical steel in the world in order to do all the needles we have to create, that kind of thing. All this stuff has to come together. All these guys are in silos. They have no way to aggregate the supply and demand, and there are thousands of competitive decision makers. Each one of optimize their own operations. We got really slow moving out oligopolies, right? These are all really highly regulated. Most of it's by the FDA or EMA in Europe or in Japan and so on. We've got a health workforce that's completely tired because it's under pandemic duress, and we got state and local governments that have no money. And they're already complaining we need more money in order to do this stuff. Then we're going to have up to eight new product entrants, right? All of a sudden, and every one of those are going to have slightly different business rules, slightly different supply chain requirements, slightly different vaccination. Pfizer stuff comes out in packets of 1,000, and the vaccinators come out in packets of 100. And the vials hold 5, and Moderna's vials hold 10 doses. Everyone's little different.
So you're saying we're back to algebra is what we're
there's a lot of math going on here. Trust me, there's a lot of math. So all that stuff's happening. Then you have the new clinical trial results that are going to change all the time. They add something here, take out something there. We're going to find out this has a bit better safety profiles for left-handed New Zealanders, and this one that has a slightly better efficacy for guys with red hair who are over 73. We'll find that stuff out. And otherwise, that's okay. Let's allocate that appropriately, and that's going to be challenging. Then we have the logistics, right, where we have 20% or more wasted because people can't control the cold chain appropriately. We've got all these non-aligned state and CDC level allocation algorithms we'll get into in a second. Got ultra cold chain requirements. So it's like holy cow, right?
So is this where something like even getting back to the PPE and that kind of stuff, is this where something like the War Powers Act would make sense? I mean, as much as people bristle about it, being able to have some of that centralized control to say, look, hey, company, for the greater good, you need to step up and do that.
That's right. Yeah, the Defense Production Act would be really helpful to create.
Defense Production
Act and executive orders would be really helpful to get people more aligned more quickly. You can only push people so far, so you have to be a little bit careful. But I'll go into areas that I think are more appropriate to use those powers in a second. And then, of course, I'll talk a lot about the integrated systems, but they're completely. You guys are IT guys, so I mean, they're inaccessible. They're unintegrated. They've got the data is highly regulated, so they can't be transmitted very easily. It's all antiquated. They got all the application systems are proprietary closed systems. They're not. No one's using open architectures. You got really brittle IT operations that can't flex with scale. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I threw in some slides for you guys. You might like it. So the third big issue is the complexity, right? And there's 3 kinds of big complexity I'm worried about. First, the static complexity. We've got to figure out how to put together. If you look at what Pfizer's working on right now, they've got one manufacturer, one kit provider, one distributor. They're shipping to 154 sites where they're doing the clinical trials. They've got 17,000 patients that are actually getting the vaccine. Another 17,000 that are getting the saline solution so far. At the time I wrote this material, That's a, kind of a number of different configurations. You have about 109 million. Yeah, it's manageable if you're smart.
Right.
Now, if you suddenly move to production, this is the level of complexity in the next 12 months is going to increase by a factor of 2.6 million.
Crazy.
The options you're going to have and the things you got to have to think about and how fast and so on are just by the static, this is permanent nodes. And then if you think about the dynamicism within each of those nodes, how many processes you've got, how often they change, how much they change, what the variability in the processes are, whether they're nonlinear processes or not, whether the process control points, how many you got, and how often you need to take measurements. You're talking about an immense amount of complexity. And I got to think about all this all the time because I got to figure out how often we want to take cold chain, how often do we want to change right, how much are we going to release, all that stuff gets into the equation. It's a huge linear program that requires some quantum computing here and there. And then you've got some decision-making complexity. Everyone has different policies. The politics get confusing. You got dependencies, sequencing hierarchies. You got different levels of automation. Some people learn faster than others. It just gets amazing. So it sort of amuses me. It's things you can work on and play with and enjoy. But the thing is, now we got a problem. It's not just fun to analyze it. You got to do something about it.
Yep.
Right? And that's what we're worried about. So let's do something about it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to allocate. In other words, the supply is so constrained versus the demand that you can't use a demand. You can't just say, okay, everyone go out and get the vaccine. Everyone will want one. So what they're going to do, overwhelm the system. What they're going to do is every day they're going to say, ask Pfizer, they're going to ask Moderna, how much did you produce? And they're going to it'll go into the CDC and say, okay, you got 10 million doses. And the CDC will say, okay, Wyoming, you get 3, and California, you get 40 because you're bigger. And it'll be based on the CDC is going to base it on these criteria. The first criteria is the first people who get this will likely be healthcare workers. And there are 3 reasons for this. The first reason that we thought about was healthcare workers are already in healthcare facilities, and healthcare facilities have some of the capabilities that are required to inject. They don't have to, that's helpful.
Well, and they're the ones who need the protection from it right away.
Yeah, and the second, and the bigger reason is they actually could get sick. If they get sick, they're down. They can't help people, and they could spread it to other people really fast, especially compromised people. And so it turns out if you vaccinate healthcare people, you actually save many more lives than if you vaccinate the general public randomly. The second big group you want to vaccinate are the essential workers, right? Guys who are out in the field, the police, the fire departments, because they're the same, and it's kind of the same situation. They go down, and you buildings burn down, and they also are out in the public a lot, and people get sick. And the last big piece that you want to help out are the people who are super fragile, because they're going to die if they don't get the vaccine. If they catch the disease, then that's likely they'll die. So those are the first 3 types of people who will be vaccinated first. In the 20 million doses, the allocation right now, until we knew what the efficacy was 17 million healthcare workers, 3 million kind of split mostly to the super sick. Because we now know the efficacy is so much better than we thought it was going to be, it turns out that you'll save more lives if you vaccinate the super susceptible first. So you got to question, do you try to vaccinate the super spreaders first, or you try to vaccinate the super, or you try to vaccinate the super susceptible first? And the answer is it depends on the vaccine. If the vaccine is super effective, the answer is you go after the guys who are going to die without it. If the vaccine's variably effective, then you go after the super spreader. So we're going to probably vary that from 17 and 3 ratio to maybe as much as 12 and 8. We're still figuring that out. So then you go to that kind of goes through March, and we're predicting that the vaccines will be available December 20th probably, and maybe as late as the 27th. And now with Moderna, there's more pressure. So phase 2, 85 million people, and these will be the rest of the elderly who are in congregate living conditions. It'll be teachers in education. It'll be other essential workers, and the homeless and guys who have no access to healthcare who are likely to be out in public and spreading disease. And then you have to continue on with getting the remainder elders with comorbidity and the laggards from phase 1. And then you move to the next level. That's in September. We'll make the vaccine eligible for 90 million people. That'll be all the older adults and children. The reason we waited on children is we won't have the results of clinical trials until then. Right now, we're testing anyone over the age of 12. So we have to, the school children probably won't get vaccinated until September. Sort of a bummer. But that's that's the way the algorithm is going to work. And then phase 4, which is going to probably be starting in December of 2021, will make the vaccine available to everybody else. So chances are you're not going to get vaccinated. You were saying April, probably not going to get vaccinated until at least November of next year.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem is that there's some people who are going to be left over. They'll need second generation vaccines. They'll be the pregnant women, the immunocompromised, and people who have lots of serious adverse events from the first phase 1 vaccines, right? So they'll be kind of some stragglers there. But the real problem is that if you want to achieve herd immunity, you're going to have to vaccinate at least 70% of the population, probably close to 85% of the population, just really safe. And right now, if you count up with anti-vaxxers, we see kind of 4 different groups of people. The first are people who just won't get vaccinated. There's 30 million of those. Then there are people who just don't believe in COVID. They think it's political. There's 65 million of those. And then you have the people who are resisting because culturally they've been, discriminated against in the past. We're talking about the minority population, right. And people of color, and that's 50 million of them. And then we have the people who are sort of, let's wait. That's more like what you said, right, Dave? I want to wait and see what happens to those other guys who get vaccinated first. Then I'll think about it. That's about 65 million people like that. And
I mean, that's 210 million people.
That's the problem. Yeah, only about 40% of the people are ready to take this step, the first vaccine. Yeah. If that. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what the survey.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was, that's the logistics is what I was not concerned with. But looking, is it going to be free at CVS and Walgreens? Are you going to get a knock on your door? Is it,
I'm proposing they repurpose ice cream trucks and just send them through the neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
While you get your ice cream, you get a shot in the thigh through that garbage hole.
But you take a shot of the Primatine Mist and you get the fudgesicle.
No, but like, are they going to give you?
Actually, what will be better?
Are they
something heated?
Are they going to give you a card then, so you can walk around without a mask? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I'm just trying to think through the logistics of this.
So there will be have and have nots, guys who were able to get the vaccination, guys who weren't able to get vaccination, coming together, and we're going to have to work on that sort of awkward transition period, that the teenage years sort of period. But that's what's happening at the federal level. So at this point, Wyoming got 3 doses, right? So what does Wyoming do? Well, the answer is it actually has its own allocation system. Right. So now you're starting to see some of the logistics, right? And so in the first state, they might want to say that prisoners, for example, want to go for it. Maryland, they decided to prioritize the prisoners. They're going to put prisoners first because they've got a lot of outbreak in the prisons. Whereas Wyoming, I think, as I recall, wanted to do all the elderly first and not worry about the healthcare and so on. Each of these guys are going to get their allocation and do different things with it. And it's actually going to have to be pretty quick, because every day we're going to have to try to vaccinate literally thousands and thousands of people in each of these centers. We're probably going to try to vaccinate 100 people an hour, 12 hours a day at these sites. That's
I mean, like I'm envisioning, like, is it going to be like the rock the vote things that were set up everywhere, and you go go sit and line up, get wait your turn, get in the tent, get your dose, and off you go.
Yeah, I was talking to people today. They're talking about having car drive-through events where you can listen to Jay-Z and get down with him, and then as you're driving through, get the shot in the arm and keep driving. Get the little vaccination stamp. Yep, I got my vaccination stamp. And keep going. Yeah. It's going to be pretty wild. And each state's going to be different. Each jurisdiction going to be some states are bottom up, like Georgia. Georgia has the most counties of any state in the country. It turns out they don't want to do really anything at the state level. They'll let each county figure out what they're going to do. California's a hybrid model, right? They actually have LA and San Francisco do their own thing, and the rest of the other 68 jurisdictions in the state, they are centralized and a system called CalReady. I'll show that in a second. Other states are highly top down. Massachusetts, we do exactly what we say. We'll figure that out for Boston. Thank you very much. Right. So there are different ways of working for every state. And basically, we all want to work with these four variables. First question is, what is a policy? Do you want which populations do you want to promote? Then the question is about health status. Which people are actually eligible for the vaccine. And then the next question is about how dangerous is COVID right now. We probably want to go without places that are forecasting having outbreaks versus the guys who are in pretty, under quite a bit of control first. And then you got to figure out how much actual vaccine you got around. And so all the allocations are going to be, figuring things out. And the problem is all these systems are basically ancient and they aren't scaled for this and they don't have the data sets available. And it's just going to be wild. So my guess is there are going to be two different strategies. One is people come to the vaccines, means you have big centralized areas like Ford Field. The guys come to that, and everyone in the state comes to that. The other alternative is to have the vaccines go to the people, and that would be much more. Let's go facility by facility. Let's go to the nursing home. Let's go to the hospital, and so on. So
well, yeah, but I mean, is your local CVS or Walgreens? Do they even have do they have the capacity or capability to store something at minus 70 degrees?
No, they don't actually.
I mean,
they don't have that capacity. So it might be
a practical consideration there.
Yeah. And these are multi-jurisdictional, right? So that's the other kind of interesting overlay. These multi-jurisdictional operations like CVS, like Walgreens, they go across a whole bunch of state lines, right? So they actually have systems that are superseding these individual jurisdictional states. And these guys are complaining because, like for Walgreens, they actually have 70 different systems that have to supply all these different jurisdictions, and they're going crazy trying to maintain them, right? All of a sudden, before they're sort of doing 10 vaccines a day in a facility, and they sort of would cobble it together and they scribble stuff down and fax it over. Now doing 1,000, you're doing 1,200 a day instead of 10 a day.
Yeah,
you're trying to work with paper systems, and they're saying we cannot manage to maintain 70 different systems for one store to be able to tell all the different jurisdictions.
Right.
It's wild, right? So it's just not set up for this. So here's what the systems look like. I put in a couple slides for you guys because I know you like the IT part of it. This is the way the system should look, right? The jurisdiction should be able, so it works from individual level all the way to population level. At the population level, you want to be able to manage the vaccine, the birth cohort, the risk group, the area, your genotype, all sort of, and then say, here's who we want to cover. And we'll be able to prioritize that risk group and get them all vaccinated. Well, it turns out that the population level data in most states gets allocated every month. So here we are trying to allocate every vaccine every day based on population issues, and we only have the data being repopulated every month. And some states do it every year. Some states do it every quarter. So that's one of the first problems. We don't really know where we stand at any given point. We have no national vaccine registry. Every vaccine and all the information about a vaccine, who gets it, what the adverse events are, is stored in each of these jurisdictions. And so in order to access this and find out what's going on with the vaccine, in order to aggregate all that together, you'd think they'd be able to do that. They can't. They have no idea because all the
That's surprising.
All the data models are different, right? They're using non-machine readable data sets. So you can't automate any of this stuff. It's just like, you got to be kidding me. And then the adverse events data, it's a brand new system. We've never used it before. You don't know if it's going to work or not. I shouldn't laugh.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not a good. Let me just say it's going to be. I think through April is going to be fine. The first 20 million and largely healthcare workers are going to work out fine. I think when we move to 80 million and 95 million eligible, 137 million eligible, at that point the systems are going to start to really suffer, and we're going to have challenges allocating the vaccine appropriately, and people are going to cheat the system, and there's going to be a lot of unhappiness. And you can see that the Mount Everest hill that I showed you. The fire side, that's just this little area of manufacturing and supply chain, and the very bottom, right? That you can see that We have to build the rest of this stuff. We don't have it. We don't have electronic medical health records or health, that's just HIE, not ETI, health and information exchanges that are available in most states today. We can do it, like New York is a pretty good one. Michigan actually is a pretty good one. But most of the states have nothing that they can actually, transfer medical records, understand who's been vaccinated with what, under what circumstances, what their pharmacy, full pharmacy management, full pharmacy medication management looks like, what their full medical record looks like, how to schedule people who are.
Yeah, I'm amazed every time, like whatever, you go to a doctor's office and they're faxing over a prescription. Like, what?
I know. Yes, I know. I know. It's just so, and that's the environment I work in all the time. And it's just, and then the pharmacy management systems, these are really mission critical systems that are basically, there are 5 of them, right? There's one for Walgreens, there's one for CVS, there's one for the independents, and there are a couple more that are sort of scattered around. And these systems are basically focused on, am I going to get paid and by whom? They're not really worried about a single vaccine,
right,
and scheduling and doing anything that's automated. They don't have like an open table reservation. It's a physical call, and then you get the vaccine and you get a little card that says come back for your booster shot in 30 days. And it's all you got to be kidding me, right? You're going to do that for 240 million people. So you're watching and so this is why I'm saying it's going to be this is the 4th big bet we're making, that we can actually get ourselves together and actually make this work. Then you have to have vaccination monitoring. We don't even have an uptake monitoring system available. We have to cobble together what's going on at these four different non-communicative systems that are all very proprietary, because Walgreens doesn't want to tell CVS what it's
right.
And then you got the national laboratory system, and they're a very antiquated system. Everyone, by the way, is using HL7 2.5, so it's non-machine readable, so nothing can be automated. There's no direct transfer of data into machine learning environments. There's no natural language processing, no NLP. Everything has to be very structured. The supply chain management systems we got, we won't have any real aggregation and understanding of supply or demand. And so that's the system that we need but don't have.
The sad reality is, behind every single one of those boxes, there are countless IT guys who have been stuck in back rooms and basements that are ripping their hair out going, I told you we needed to upgrade.
Oh, they know. They've been working on limited budgets for 30 years, right? And they've been starving. They've been saying, hey, over here, we need some money because we're using old stuff and it's killing me. And I won't say the state, but in one of the states, there's literally only one guy who, of all their IT guys, who knows all the systems. So you have to talk to that one guy. If that guy gets hit by a truck, we got no hope.
That's probably not an isolated situation either.
Oh no, this is a state that actually invests a lot in their in IT, and this is one of the better states. And every time I have don't get me started. But at any rate, that's what we got. Now, this is what it's supposed to look like, right? The problem is that our systems are set up for basically monitoring very steady state, very controlled diseases. Pneumonia, flu, that's all in control. All of a sudden, we got COVID, and we're having outbreaks. Well, the system you need for an outbreak is completely different from the system you need to manage sort of a steady state environment where you got lots of backstops and you've been managing it for years and years. You got to have real-time capability. You got to mash up data from all different sources to figure out what's going on. And we got nothing. And so so this is the way it should look. You got lots and lots of data sets on the public side, all working to figure out the outbreak locations. When you get the outbreak locations, hopefully prior to that, you've got a forecast that says, we got to get vaccine coverage. Here's how we want to distribute. Here's all the different systems that need to come together for that. And, you can start to get a sense of just, what we really need versus where we are. Not even close. So what we have to do is we have to have, if the systems can't manage it, then we have to have extremely responsive deployment. So what does that look like? Well, here's what the last mile looks like, right? We got to pull together all the allocation systems, got to manufacture, transport, and store this stuff at super cold chain environments. Then we have a state level allocation system, which is for California. Then we have the vaccine that has to come together with the injector kit, all perfectly and brilliantly. Make sure you get the right vaccine with the right injector kit. And then you got to have a vaccinator who's ready to stand by. And as you pointed out, Walgreens doesn't have a lot, you're talking about 14,000 sites, as I recall, 9,000 for CVS. So you got a lot of sites, but
Right.
but they're not set up to basically be vaccinating 1,000 people a day. You sit there and you want to go to Walgreens and pick up a newspaper and some bag of potato chips, and you're sitting there with all these guys who are getting ready for their COVID shots. That's not a happy environment.
Right.
And Walgreens is doing all this stuff for free, by the way, right? They don't really like the impact on their environment very much. Thank you. And so I think the way to do this is with mobile trucks. I think that's a better solution. Now, I haven't convinced everybody who I'm working with that this is the right way, but if you had 5,000 mobile trucks deployed across the United States, you could actually pull this off. And these are these trucks where you go in the back and you come out the front, and you get your you get set up, you get your vaccination, you get here's your booster, and here's what to do about things, and you've got a dedicated system that actually manages the appointments and the vaccination management, and everything else is superfluous, because the rest of the systems are basically looking at how to get paid from an insurance company.
Right.
Need most of the system. So then that goes home. You've got antigen home testing at home. You've got a central lab that looks at serology, looks at the antibody levels, see if vaccine is working or not. And then you pull all those results in, and you can do analytics and manage the supply chain in a real closed loop system, which is what you want. That's what I think is going to be necessary, but we're far from that today. So that's so we've got having said all this, I think we are going to get the vaccine out in record time. I think it's going to be ugly, but I think we're going to do it one way or the other, right? So here's the last question. The last question is, are people going to take the thing?
Right.
So suppose we got a 90% effective vaccine. It's about off the charts effectiveness, right? If only half the people are willing to take it, the degree of control we have over the virus is 45%. Right?
Yep. It's pretty simple math. Yeah.
Pretty simple math. So then what you do is you say, okay, how many people already have antibodies? They got sick, and they still have some antibodies in them, so they're also a non-effective. It's about 10% of the population right now. And that means that what we need to get herd immunity is 85%. We're going to be at 55%. So we got a 30% gap in control. And so the answer is we're going to have to convince some of the people in these groups that I talked about, well, we're not going to get to herd immunity. And so, and if you think about all the things that happened, I mean, we did screw some stuff up. We went fast. This revolution kind of overwhelmed the CDC. It overwhelmed the Health and Human Services. It overwhelmed the FDA. We were scrambling a lot. People were working hard, had good intentions, but we made some mistakes. We were going so quick. So CDC lost a lot of credibility. We messed up the test. We authorized. We said we authorized things and didn't authorize things. We reversed guidances at the last minute. We sent out guidances that were wrong. Oh God, there were problems. And that happens. They're not insurmountable, but it hurt us, right? And then the same thing with HHS. They got so frustrated. They said, forget the CDC. Send all your data to us. We'll figure it out. And so all the hospitals had to send stuff, not just the CDC, but also HHS. What is going on here, right? But we have a federal contractors doing that, not real healthcare professionals. So we've got some challenges with that. The FDA, meanwhile, you saw all the FDA problems, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we had problems, and so people lost trust. And so how do you rebuild the trust? And the answer is, well, you got to do some real marketing, and it's worth investing a lot in this, because if people don't take the test, all this work we did to get the vaccine out isn't going to matter a bit, because we're not going to hit herd immunity. And I think these are the segments we talked about before. We could talk about, it could be slightly different with the skeptical laggards, right? They're waiting. I think we can convince a lot of them. I think we convince them with education. I think we can say, look, see your doctor. Here's the doctor recommending it. I think that we can document success. We can say, hey, look, here are all the new things you can do if you take a vaccine. It'll be great for you. And I think that if they see that their population are doing okay, they'll be convinced. And I'm sort of counting on that. The next big area is the cultural resistors. These are the people of color who say, gosh, I don't trust this stuff. It's just, it doesn't feel like it was done for me. And they're slightly different. You need to, say, okay, we made some mistakes. We have a new social contract now. It's easy to do. And we're doing it just for you guys. And the delivery is much more through spiritual leaders, celebrities, trusted ambassadors, and also healthcare professionals. You want to get doctors involved, and the media is slightly different as well. But I think we can get about half of that. The angry disbelievers and the anti-vaxxers, no chance, right?
Yeah.
We've been in, I've been in the field enough, and they, some people are absolutely legitimate. They have reasons that they don't want to be vaccinated. No problem with that. It's about 9%. It's going to stay 9%. And they've got their reasons for deciding what they've decided. They have their data sets, and they're going to do that. And the angry disbelievers, they're angry. They're pissed off. They can't blame them. They'd have reason for that too.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to change either. And so I think we're going to be at about a 40% rate of that's sort of our best shot. But 60% will take it, 40% aren't. I think that's about as good as we're going to get, at least through 2022. Maybe it'll get better. So if we have mandates, if your employer says, if you don't take that test, you're not going to be a server here, or you're not going to be able to be a policeman, or you're not, because you're going to be out and about, and we don't want to, that's our policy. So take it or not. And there'll be a few people that are convinced by that. Okay, I don't want to lose my job. I'll do that. I think school children, there'll be some mandates for that. So we'll get it up a little bit more than 60, but we're talking, not 70. I don't think
Not where it needs to be. Yeah.
Yeah, not 70, not 85. That's for sure. So we have to also prevent the spread of misinformation, and I think we can do that working with some of the platforms. And if we can't, then you start to use those executive war powers acts. You say this is a matter of national security. We're killing off 200,000 people a year. And if that isn't a war, I don't know what is. And we're going to have an executive order that says, all those guys are using social media, through Article 230 that publish anything they like and don't have there are no consequences. That stops today.
Yep.
You're going to be in court for an awful long time. It's going to cost Mr. Zuckerberg a lot of money, right? Eventually. So anyway. Those are some of the things we have to worry about to convince us regulars. Now, there's one more area that's going to be sort of interesting we have to control. And that is that there's going to be a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are going to make a lot of money on this. And the truth is, they deserve it. They took a huge amount of risk. We help them with that risk, though. So we should get some benefit, and we are, right? We're probably going to save 500,000 lives. That's a huge benefit. But eventually, people are going to get unhappy, right? They're going to say, wait a minute, we took a risk with you guys 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You're still making a lot of money, and it's costing me. Once these deals go off the books, and by the middle of 2022, pharmaceutical companies will be able to price what they want, right? It's not going to be controlled.
Well, and so I guess one of the other things, because I know that there was the issue where right after Pfizer did their announcement, Pence went out and said, hey, this was all part of Operation Warp Speed. Hey, look at all the great stuff we're doing. Pfizer then immediately came out and went, no, it wasn't.
Yeah. And both Pence and Pfizer were right. Pence's point was,
because wasn't there there's a German company in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, BioNTech.
Yeah.
And so Pence said, look, we gave you $1 billion. That's not chicken feed. And we guaranteed you sales of your doses on day one. So that's part of as far as I'm concerned, that's part of Operating Warp Speed. And so Pence Pence was right. And Pfizer said, wait a minute, you guys didn't help us with this. We went out and bought our own antigen. We had our own platform. So that's not really fair that you say that this is all about us. We took the risk of those technologies, and then you're telling you're going to prepay some stuff. That's not exactly and true enough. Pfizer was a little bit on the edge of Warp Speed, but if you ask me, I think that we gave them $1 billion.
Yeah,
yeah. There's no guarantee, so they had to get FDA approval. So Pfizer was right. There was just a slightly different point of view on those two things. The other 7 companies in Operation Warp Speed, they got money for building the manufacturing sites. They got money for doing the R&D. And so they were more into it than Pfizer was. So that's fair enough. Interestingly, Pfizer has the highest price too, and we'll get into that in a second. So there's some really interesting kind of jiggling going on, and Pfizer already knows. Gosh, if we get stuck with this, and we're suddenly accused of in 2 years from now accused of gouging
Getting
US
frozen out. Yeah.
right? Or getting frozen out, or gouging the public, and we'll have a black eye for the stupid vaccine that's part of our profitability, but it's not that big a part of our profitability, right? They're going to say, wait, it's not worth it, and so we have to manage that. And the truth is, we should be a lot better at contracting. We're not figuring out enough of that social contract, right? So when we as taxpayers pay an awful lot up front for someone else to take the risk and then give them the full upside for indefinitely, that we're going to have to figure more about that out. But that's where we are right now with the deal, and so there's going to be some pushback. Not this year, not next year. People will be really thankful. But in year 4, 5, 6, there's going to be some pushback. Here's what the dollars look like. Pfizer's they're about $20 a dose, so both doses $39. Novavax is about $16 a dose, but you need both doses for that. That's $32. Novavax might be more appropriate for people who are immunocompromised, but it may not be quite as effective. So there's a little bit of trade-off there. We have to see the data. It's still in phase, just getting into phase 3 now. It'll be available probably April or so next year. Moderna, $30, $15 a dose. Interestingly, Moderna has to actually build a lot more than Pfizer. So Pfizer is, getting kind of, they negotiated a little bit better than the other groups. J&J, they had a big capacity already available. Sanofi and AstraZeneca had 6 billion doses available. So they gave a great price, especially when they put Europe at $2.50. That kind of allowed us to come in and say, we'll give you a little bit more than that, but not much more. That's how it looks. Now, what's interesting is that
it's weird that the single dose solutions are cheaper.
No, Sanofi's double dose, AstraZeneca's double dose, J&J is single dose. So they've actually J&J said, AstraZeneca comes in at $4, will be slightly more than double, because not only is it a single dose, so but it's also more convenient, and and AstraZeneca has a lot more capacity than J&J.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so that's sort of where it is. So everything's sort of falling out about what you'd expect, right, from a good free market. Now, prices could escalate quite a bit, because once they go off the contract, they're able to price whatever they want. But there could be a lot of competition. There could be 8 really good vaccines out there. And when you look at so on the global scale, U.S. has already kind of done about 25% of all the deals. So we're slightly ahead of the game in terms of the free market economy. We've got 1.6 billion doses already reserved for us. EU has about 1.3 billion doses, and so on. And interesting, you can see how much capacity is left. So CureVac is all Europe. That basically Europe is counting on CureVac and AstraZeneca. And J&J has a lot of capacity left. Moderna has a lot of capacity left, but Pfizer doesn't have much left, and so on. So you can start to see this thing coming out. Sputnik 5, that's the Russians. They have a lot of capacity left. Sinovac, that's the Chinese. They are about half done already. So there's going to be some interesting stuff happening as we roll these things out. Here's all the dose commitments on the side, and you can see the dose commitments in detail for Johnson & Johnson and how many percent of the population is covered in the UK, Canada. They are really they're trying to cover their bases, make sure that when the vaccine comes, most of the population's ready to go. So that's the way things are evolving. Now, for the U.S., we got to remember that in this particular case, we're only 4% of the population, and it's not great to be surrounded by lots and lots of sick people all over the rest of the world when 96% of the population isn't doing very well, and you're the ones that are vaccinated and doing pretty well, because there's enough sickness coming into your environment that it's going to come back and get you. So the truth about that, and the other thing is, we're not very good at this. It turns out the United States is usually like the number one competitor in the space, and so we want to make sure that we protect Americans first. In this particular case, because we're not so good at this, we should the better solution, believe it or not, it's sort of counterintuitive, is to let the global supply chains work this through rather than to be super focused on just the United States. So if you distribute the vaccines to the wealthy countries first, you'll reduce the death rate significantly, and you'll get about a 33% overall improvement. If you decide to let all the vaccines go to the places that need them most, you'll get a 61% reduction in death rate. And the reason that's important is because, it might be the better alternative for the United States to give some of the Pfizer vaccines to the healthcare workers of India to prevent a huge amount of vaccine coming back at us, a huge amount of virus coming back at us, than it is to, give it to the pretty healthy 30-year-old who is remote working in Iowa. So
Well, I mean, and I mean, that's logical to me because I mean, again, we are a nation of I feel better, so I'm going to stop taking my medicine.
Yeah, that's the other thing, exactly.
And so if we get I can see that happening. We get the vaccine is prolific or prolifically distributed here. Great. And then, okay, well, that means we can return to normal. So resume those business trips to India, to China, to wherever else that doesn't have
15 hours. Yeah, you go ahead.
And that's, oh, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and so especially with depending how effective the vaccine is and what kind of transmission levels and everything else. So at any rate, there's a lot to learn depending on the assumptions you make. The other interesting thing is the RAND Corp actually did a lot of scenario analysis, and they said it's true of the economy too. It turns out that if we go ahead and invest a vaccine, distribute only to like our richest friends and say, okay, Japan, you get vaccines, and Europe, you get your vaccines, and America, you get your vaccines, and then, we'll wait on Africa and India and all the rest of those. It turns out that we will go from a minus $3.2 trillion impact on GDP, which is how much it cost us so far. It's cost us $3.4 trillion, this economy, because of GDP, but because of COVID. We would go from minus $3.4 trillion of impact to only minus 1.2 trillion. So we've saved $2.2 trillion of the global GDP. That's fabulous. It turns out that if you give everybody sort of access as they need it, that we allocate not just from the CDC standpoint, but we pretend there's a CDC for the world, like the WHO, and we give all that, we actually almost break even. We go from 3.4 trillion to just minus $153 million. 153 billion.
Huh.
So yeah, because you've opened up all the supply chains. Right? Our supply chains are actually pretty dependent on the rest of the world, and also our demand curve is pretty dependent on the rest of the world. We export a lot of stuff. It's like we import a lot of stuff. So we're pretty dependent on the rest of the world. So it turns out that it works both from a health standpoint and from an economic standpoint, which is sort of cool. That it's better, and it's counterintuitive. You think, oh, I want to make sure I get the vaccine. It's about, but the truth is that if we think more globally, we'll actually do better, which is sort of cool. It isn't what I expected when I ran all the numbers, and then I compared it to what these other groups have done, and I said, gosh, looks like that's right somehow. Weird. So, but it's true. I think it would work that way.
And it seems counterintuitive until you think it through. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's easy to kind of say, oh, let's do that. But then if you really have to think it through, the other big thing I have to say is that it turns out we already have a vaccine-like product that is pretty damn effective, and that's masks. It turns out they've finally done all the math. The CDC came out and said masks are actually about 70% effective in controlling transmission. Remember, that's the important factor we had in vaccines. We're not even sure whether we're going to control transmission in vaccines. Now CDC came out and said we've done all the science at 70% control. That's really effective. That's remarkably effective. That's better than most vaccines. And if we add to that testing, 90%. So if we just use the tools we have, we can actually get to a slightly better number than the vaccines do, even under great scenarios. So we've done all this work. Now we're going to have to go through all the supply chain stuff. And it turns out that the tools we had probably would have gotten us to the same place for a lot cheaper and a lot less hassle than figuring this stuff all out.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that's really important. And the reason it's important is because we know how we did it for vaccines, right? What we did for vaccines is we understood what the demand was. We knew what the supply needed to be in order to satisfy the demand. We're working toward that. We knew how much COVID was doing, and we created, and we said, here's what the true demand is for vaccines, here's what the true demand is for supply for vaccines, and we're managing that. We haven't done that yet for masks. We haven't done that yet for hygiene products. We haven't done that yet for the tests. If we did, we'd know that we need about 50 times more masks and about 33 times more tests. And if to get there fast, you could do that really fast. We know that how to do that from vaccines too, right? The first thing you do is you have a Defense Production Act, and you say, like I said before, to P&G, stop making diapers and start making masks. And we want to see 1 billion of them a day. And trust me, these guys will figure it out. I mean, down the road at Will Run, we were doing what, 62 planes? We were doing what, a new B-52 every hour.
Yeah.
We can't figure out how to make some masks for every person in America. Taiwan figured out on day 2 of the pandemic, for God's sake. Korea had this testing and infrastructure in place on day 1. We just didn't get our act together. Now we could use the Defense Production Act, that's like they did for the vaccines. We use emergency use authorizations to the FDA, so they don't make the vaccine. They make new mask producers go through all these clinical tests. We just say, here are the standards. Do that.
Yeah, here's the spec. Go build. Yep.
Go build that, right? And trust me, they the guys that I work with, the guys at P&G, they're amazing. They could do this. They could get this going. And then you have guarantee. And then the last thing we did was said, and by the way, we'll buy the first 10 billion of those masks from you.
Yep.
Day 1, and you're done, right? You got something that works. So let's use that for the other quote unquote vaccine that we have, right? And that's the PPE and the testing. There's no reason we couldn't do that. There's no reason we got to suffer like this until we get a vaccine. We can get our act together pretty quick. I think really quick if we started to put our minds to it and create what I call the Apollo program, the space shot for PPE and testing. So that's the sort of the solution. We know now what works. It doesn't even require a space shot technologically. We had to go through a revolution in genetic manipulation.
Right.
We just have to know how to print, basically put fabric together on our mask. Gosh,
yeah, I feel like this isn't rocket science.
That's right. It doesn't require the Apollo program. It
right.
could be like the diaper program. That's enough for us. So that's how we do it, and we know. And now we've seen it. We can learn from that, and we can be the best again. There's no reason we're just not doing it right. And so and you asked about which countries are doing it right. Well, let's take a look at PPE. In PPE, the best guys who are doing PPE, the best mask wearers are guys in Thailand. But that's a smaller population. It's sort of
right.
a little. So let's take a look at China. They got 1.7 billion people they're controlling. They got a lot more concentration. They have an outbreak of this stuff. It goes through them like wildfire. We got much less population density than they do in China. And yet when you look at China, their PPE level control 70% like ours is. What's interesting is they have a lot more N95 masks out there, so their PPE level control is probably higher than ours. They probably start at 85 or 90% effectiveness in control. But let's just say it's the same as ours. Let's say it's 70%, which the CDC found. I trust it. So they have 95% compliance. We've got about 68, 70% compliance. If you look at all the, it's highly variable, it's self-reported, so you don't really know exactly, but we have about, so if our control is about 50%, right? That's, and we've seen death rate go down about 50%. Okay. China's control is 67%. And what that meant was that our economy shrank significantly. Their economy actually grew 2% this year. It's not quite the same trajectory it was before COVID, because they can't export as much anymore. Everyone's
naturally, yeah.
Economy, but basically they're back at what I would call economic normalcy. I mean, it's not a great environment. You don't want to live there. There's a lot of controls. So it's not socially normal. It's not healthily normalcy yet, but it sure is. They're able to produce. So I look at 3 levels of what I call herd immunity thresholds. Right. The first one is economic normalcy. It's the easiest one to get to. It's what President Trump was always trying to say. Look, open the economy. We'll get to economic normalcy. We'll have a great stock market. People will be working, and let's get on with this. But the problem was that we had so much virus out there, we weren't disciplined enough to control it like China did. And so we paid a heftier price for it. But he was fundamentally right. That's the first hurdle. The first hurdle is let's get to that level at least. Then the next level, the other group to look at is Taiwan. They're really good with testing. They test everybody. and they say, do you have the disease? And then they contact trace. You get into Taiwan, and the first thing you do when you get off the plane is you get a test, and then you go into quarantine for 14 days. I mean, these guys have it really under control. They have 90% control. They got 98% compliance. It's probably even higher than that. So they're already at 82%, what I would say, control of the virus. You go to Taiwan, it's normal. You know, it's people are healthy. They're out, out and about. They've got their economy going great. Now it's an island that's a little bit easier to control, frankly, than a big continent. But the point is, these are the numbers you want to get to, right? That's the sort of the, and then social normalcy, which would be great, is it really depends a little bit more on the journey you take. I mean, if you're like, if you're forcing people to do stuff and you go through also, and you get a lot of social unrest in order to get to by COVID control, then you really haven't won the war, right? It's not really socially normal. You got something, but it's not.
It's a forced norm. Yeah.
The journey does matter, and so I'm saying we can't really tell social normalcy yet, but it's another. I put it between economic and health normalcy. So that's where we are. We think we know that in order to get herd immunity and get economically normal back to growth and people being healthy enough to be productive and so on, 67%, and for everything being normal, about 82%. Based on sort of the empirical evidence we got. So if we put that into the United States, I think with the vaccine scenario that we're talking about, we could get the economic normalcy by early 2022, and we can get back to social and health normalcy on a global basis, because that's what it's going to take for health normalcy, probably by 2028, 2029. So, not bad. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And so that's what I told Harvard. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think that's longer than most people are thinking through. When it comes to a return, to quote unquote, and that's the conversation and discussions that I get into, like with our local school board here and that kind of stuff. Is it seems like so many people are trying so hard to put in quick, dirty duct tape stopgap solutions to get to what they believe is what the norm used to be.
Yeah.
Because they refuse to accept that norm is gone.
Yeah,
and I think that's a really hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, that we're not going to get back to February until that last slide, until 6 to 8 years from now at a minimum. We're just not going to be there.
I think we'll get to U.S. normalcy probably by mid 2022, 2023. People feel pretty good. It'll be certainly by this time next year we'll start to see that inflection point. We'll start to see that we're really starting to win the battle. Right, and that'll really be a lift, I think, because we won't go into Thanksgiving thinking, God, it's going to get really terrible between now and Christmas. And we'll have survived a lot of vaccinations. It won't have been too pretty or perfect, but we'll have some good outcomes, and people will be feeling like we're on a good pathway.
So I'm curious, just real quick. I don't know if you've looked into this or not yet, but we talked about it, I think, either last week or the week before, where apparently there's a team of scientists that think they've detected a COVID signature in a cough that even the human ear can't detect, but their algorithms can, and so they're trying to figure out, you're talking about home testing and that kind of stuff. They're trying to figure out how to basically get it appified, and how to get that normed. I just didn't know if you looked at that or if you knew anything about it.
Yeah, and they're also they're cough signatures. There are voice signatures. That you can and there's a group at MIT that's looking at voice signatures. So basically, you talk into a phone, and they hear certain characteristics about your lung function that then say, therefore this person is likely to have COVID. You can detect lung scarring. You can detect the breathing levels through the phone with that slight amplification. That's right. So there are some interesting detection. There are bubble technologies. I'm working with a group of a number of Nobel laureates that are brilliant mathematicians who are trying to figure out how to manage bubbles. So you've got bubbles that are controlled by you, that you move in your family to your workplace, to random bubbles as you transport yourself through public.
Right.
how to control bubbles. So that's sort of interesting technology. They're looking at training dogs to detect COVID. If you go to airports in Europe, they'll have dogs there. They're looking at scratch and sniff capabilities, because some of the first things you've got that you lose is your sense of smell and taste.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at 3 different scratch and sniff tests. But the best thing is going to come out is true testing. They're going to have, home testing that reports back on a de-identified basis what this is. And this is largely solid state stuff. So it's, your cell phone detects it after you spit into a detector, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll transmit based on tokens your status.
Crazy. That'd be great.
Yeah, it'll get there probably first quarter of 2020. If you the technology's cool, and it'll get there for employers, I think, by the end of this year, and for the general public by early to mid next year. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
all right, well, man, fascinating as always. Again, thank you for taking the time to do this with us. It is greatly appreciated.
Any questions from the audience? I'm sorry I went on forever, but I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely. I think we're good. Bob, you got anything? Randy?
No, I think we covered all the questions.
You look exhausted, Bob. You look well, with that,
past my bedtime. I'm not.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope it's the beginning of it's going to be a troublesome period through, as I said, kind of early next year. But after that, I hope we're on a good curve.
Very cool. All right, well, hey, Bob, take us out.
All right, hey, this is going to wrap things up for episode 374. I'd like to thank the illustrious one, Fred Brown. Find him online, fredbrown.com. On behalf of Bob, Dave, and Randy, do us all a favor. Drink up your drinks. Get your phone numbers. You don't got to go home. You just got to get the hell out of here and go to bed. See you next week. Drive careful. Beat it.
See you guys.
Thanks.